All right, Raina, we ready? All right. Wow, packed house. I want to welcome everybody to the City of Healdsburg City Council Redevelopment Successor Agency regular meeting. It's December 16th at 6:01 p.m. And I would like to call the meeting to order. And could we do a quick roll call, please?
Councilmember Edwards.
Here.
Councilmember Harrod.
Here.
Councilmember Kelly.
Here.
Vice Mayor Mitchell.
Here.
Mayor Hagley.
Here. With that, if everybody could join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, next up is approval of the agenda. And what I'd like to do, we have a very tight timeline for the public hearing that is time specific. What I'd like to do is move agenda item 8A to after public comment number 5. So if that's okay, I'd entertain a motion.
I move to approve the agenda with item 8A happening right after item 5.
Second.
All right, motion and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Hearing no opposed, that passes. Next up is report on closed session. There was no reportable action. We did have a closed session tonight, but there was no reportable action. And we'll move on to announcements and presentations. And the first one is a recognition of city employees with milestone anniversaries. Director Zimmer.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. It is my honor and pleasure to call up with me Victor Halverson. We are celebrating 35 years of service. There'll be time. Come on up, Victor. So Victor started as a reserve firefighter in 1985 and started as a utility worker in 1989. Victor is a resident of Healdsburg, and his wife, Michelle, and mother-in-law, Tony, are in the crowd. Being a resident, he often gets called out for emergency services, which he is always quick to respond to. When I think of Victor, the first thing I think of is customer service. He, as a foreman, is out there in less than ideal circumstances for the residents and business owners. And yet, every time I hear back from a resident about their interaction, it is always positive. I hear he really cares about the residents here. He does great work. He's such a nice guy. It's just one after another. And I want to thank you for doing that and representing the city. And speaking of many people saying nice things about him, I think Jason Boaz has a couple things to say.
Thank you, Director Zimmer. Hello, Council. Jason Boaz, Fire Chief. Director Zimmer is right. Victor did begin his career with the City of Healdsburg at the fire department before he got hired in Public Works. And he began as a reserve firefighter in 1985, as mentioned. However, he actually started as an explorer here in 1982, which means he, in total, has 42 years of service with the City of Healdsburg. And then at the age of 18, became a reserve firefighter. He then, I think in 1990, promoted to reserve engineer, which is the status he continues to hold at the fire department, which basically means he's a driver operator as well as a firefighter. What I appreciate the most about Victor as fire chief is really his reliability over all this time at the fire department and his work ethic. He continues to maintain outstanding drill attendance and has always done that. And he is always there when we need him in emergencies. And it's just an added bonus to us and to the city that Victor has such a great working knowledge of the city water and utility system. So I would like to thank you, Victor, for all of your service to the fire department and the city, and also to Michelle. Michelle, thank you for staying by his side and supporting him through all the time he spends at the fire department at the city. And also Tony, Michelle's mom, welcome. I appreciate you being here in attendance. So Victor, thank you again, and I hope you stick around a while longer. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And Victor's first line supervisor.
Save the best for last. All right, I brought a box too.
Oh, no.
All right. I've had the privilege of knowing Vic for over 30 years now. I too was a fire explorer, and I started there age 14, Vic was one of my mentors. Vic has always been dedicated to helping others, whether it be acting as a reserve firefighter, a scout leader, a National Guardsman, a family man, and most importantly, a city employee. Weekly, I hear Victor say the words, "I'm here to serve the ratepayers and do what's best for them." And his work ethic exemplifies these values. Victor is always available to help after hours, day and night, weekend and holidays. He is truly dedicated to serving others, and congratulations on 35 years.
Appreciate it.
So what I have in the box today, typically we give a Leatherman that's engraved with how many years they've worked for the city with their name on it. Today we have something special. We have a
Yeah.
water meter, probably been here for 35 years. That's also engraved.
Thank you.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you, City Council. I love Hillsburg. I've been very blessed to have this job and to be here today. Hillsburg in the community and family and support present and past got me through Iraq when I was in the war. I couldn't wait to get home. I would get the paper daily and, or weekly, I should say, and knowing what's going on back here while I was overseas. I really appreciate this. Hillsburg is more than just a job, and I'm very, very thankful and grateful for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Victor. Stick around. We want to get a picture with you. We have a couple more proclamations and then we'll do some photos. But thank you very much for your service. Next up, we have a proclamation recognizing St. John's School's 75th anniversary. So I will read this one. This is a proclamation of the City Council of the City of Healdsburg recognizing St. John the Baptist Catholic School on the occasion of their 75th anniversary educating students in the City of Healdsburg. Whereas St. John's School, founded by the Sisters of the Holy Infant Jesus, opened its doors to 89 students in 1950. And in 1959, as the school grew alongside the expanding community, the demand for more space led to the addition of 4 new classrooms. These classrooms, which continue to be in use today, are located on Tucker Street. And St. John's School encourages every child to be faith-filled, responsible, and respectful lifelong learners. And St. John's School currently has an enrollment of 315 students across preschool through 8th grade and is now welcoming the 3rd generation of many alumni families whose numbers exceed 11,000. And the St. John's School community is united and vibrant. Through groups like the Parent Teacher Guild, Dad's Club, and Mom's Club, they create opportunities to bring families together, promote active parent involvement, build camaraderie, and empower one another. And St. John's School is shaping future leaders through its active student council, Tiger Pods, and a school-wide buddy system while fostering self-confidence through their annual talent show and spring community theater productions. And St. John's School is dedicated to community service and charitable giving through its annual service project, Fiat, Faith in Action Today, in which each class selects a charitable initiative to support throughout the year. This campaign includes activities such as food drives, clothing drives, and efforts to promote environmental awareness. And St. John's School is dedicated to creating an environment where students can grow academically, spiritually, and morally. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed that the City Council of the City of Healdsburg hereby recognizes St. John the Baptist Catholic School on the occasion of their 75th anniversary educating students in the City of Healdsburg. Mr. Felice, did you want to come up, or was Student Council was going to come receive the proclamation? Oh. Yeah, should have handed it to you. Well, here, there you go. If you wanted to say some things, and then we'll get a picture after this. Did you want to say a few words?
Really prepared, but I will, Mayor Higley and council, thank you for having us tonight. And I'm very honored to be here. I want to dispel the rumors I was in one of the first graduating classes. But all six of my children did go through the school. So I'm deeply rooted in the community here. We love the community. We have tremendous support from not only the city government, but also services. Mr. DeRico's helped us out quite a bit. Chief Boaz and his team, the police department. So we're very grateful to be a small part of our community, and we want to continue for the next 75 years. So thank you very much. And these are three of our student council members. Joe Giordani and Kevin Suazo and Annie Leba. And we also have some other students present, Jackson Hagley, Charlotte Hagley, and is that it? And I'm just extremely proud of our students. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you could stick around, we'll get a picture. Next up is celebrating the 10th anniversary of Healdsburg Running Company. Councilmember Kelly.
A proclamation of the City Council of the City of Healdsburg celebrating Healdsburg Running Company on the occasion of their 10-year anniversary and for their contributions to the community. Whereas Healdsburg Running Company has become a vital and beloved part of the Healdsburg community. HRC has organized and hosted more than 2,500 free fun runs throughout Sonoma County, fostering fitness, friendship, and community engagement. HRC has also established the iconic Lake Sonoma Race Series, a signature event that has become a staple of the running community, attracting participants from across the country. And beyond fitness, HRC has raised nearly $500,000 for local and national charities, including the Live Like Drew Scholarship Fund, Children of the Vineyards Scholarship Fund, Run for Stomp, and Food to Firefighters. And HRC has been a place where people connect, train, and inspire each other to live healthier, more active lives. HRC is a proud home to a team of approximately 20 exceptional staff members who have fostered a culture of excellence, empowering hundreds of runners, many of whom have gone on to become scholars, professional athletes, and leaders, making a positive impact in communities worldwide. So now, therefore, be it proclaimed that the City Council of the City of Healdsburg hereby celebrates the Healdsburg Running Company on the occasion of their 10-year anniversary and for their contributions to our community.
Come on up, Skip.
First of all, Vic is a hero and a legend, and then we have God itself and our Catholic school, which is amazing. But thank you, City Council and members. I do want to just tell a couple quick stories, and I'll be quick, I promise. One, the town is just a place where you learn to live, and when I say live, you kind of have to learn to live to serve. I mean, that's kind of how you live here. The other is you have to love it. If you don't, your passion is priceless, is what matters here. And then you have to learn. You have to listen to everybody because you really only learn by listening here. And last, it's kind of fun to have Vic and the school that's 75. We're 10 down and we literally need 100 to go. We have to leave a legacy. And we get to compete against just a small place that sells a lot of shoes called Amazon. But the neat thing is here is everything works if you have a good why. And so I think Will helped me a little bit, but we wanted to call Healdsburg Healthsburg. And the thought was we need to get everybody healthy. So we are on our way to be the fittest small town in America. And we do believe running or walking definitely changes lives. But the unique part about the community is it changes with people. So an example, we mentioned Run for Stump. What an amazing human she was. It was just our, Ted started the turkey trot who's here with Kim, but we had our first turkey trot in town. Sarah was the most amazing athlete. I'm about to put her up on a truck and run the race, and she grabs my arm. She says, Skip, I can't run today. I say, what's up, Sarah? You're a legend. You've won everything at UC Davis. And she says, Skip, I have a tumor the size of a softball. I just can't. I can barely get up on the truck. My life changed forever, and the store mission changed forever. Because when that happens to you with an employee early on, like right away, this was before the store opened. It's what set the store just kind of in motion. That's why it was easy to work with Andy and Susie for Live Like Drew. It's high school scholarships. Our kids are everything in our future, and running's one way to bring it back. Also, the small town has tons of challenges, and we changed our lives forever. The firemen here are amazing. Sure enough, we've had 7 years, 8 fires, and 3 of them right by Healdsburg. So I think it's a big deal. I'm a runner. My whole run community starts shipping me socks and shoes and everything for people who have lost their homes. So I'm like, okay, the running group's got my back. They're from towns like Bend, Oregon, and everywhere. So they're just coming in. They're driving it in. They're not even shipping it in. And sure enough, then the restaurants, I go next door and the restaurants are cooking. I'm like, guys, it's COVID. What are you cooking for? You don't have any money. We're not going to have any business. We have this big fire. They're like, well, we need to bring food to the firefighters. So sure enough, the whole community acted. We raised 40 grand in 20s and $10 bills, not big, wealthy people. And that changed us forever. Now in February, we'll do Firemen Run Free and bring all these firefighters that were in to run like Sonoma. Just one more story here, and then I'll say something about the staff. The local businesses are incredible. I used to tell people, it's so fun, all distances, all paces, and no one runs alone. To a non-runner, it means two flipping fast, two flipping far, and I'm by my flipping self. So the businesses here come to me and they're so awesome. They're like, Skip, we'll host them because these people will run for food and they'll run for wine and they'll run for beer. So we've had 2,500 runs, but hosted always by a community member. And that's business just at its core. The last thing I would tell you is the races. The only reason people show up for any of these community races is the why. That's why I'm here. The why is way bigger than running, whether it's scholarships or vineyard worker kids. That's kind of why we do it. And then last but not least, my company gets to change, like all of your companies and the town, with one new person. So every time we get a new staff member, they have a new idea and it changes a little business, but they come from the community. So that's what's so fun being here. Ralph came up to me. He's a Guamanian. I barely know where Guam is, but I get it. And he's like, hey, I want to work there because I saw the sign in the store that says running changes lives. He's now an owner. So Kim, thank you. Escovals, thank you. Holly, so much for letting me do this. There's a party Thursday. We know how to party, and it'd be at Sonoma Coyote, and everyone's welcome. So thank you for letting us make it for 10 years. And Jeff Bezos retired before I did.
All right, Skip, hang on. Skip, let's get a picture real quick and then we'll do St. John and then with Victor.
Guys ready?
Yeah.
One.
All right, as everybody takes their seats, we'll move on because we've got to start one by 6:30. So we'll move on to city manager reports.
Mayor, acknowledging that we have a time-sensitive item tonight, I will actually forego the report except to say to the council, the staff, the community, I appreciate everybody's partnership this year. Wish everybody a happy, healthy holiday season. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next up, we'll move on to public comments on items on the consent calendar and non-agenda items. This time is set aside to receive comments from the public regarding matters of general interest not on the agenda, but related to city council business. Pursuant to the Brown Act, however, the city council cannot consider any issues or take action on any request during this comment period. So is there anybody that would like to speak during this public comment period on non-agenda items? All right, not seeing anyone. I will close public comment and we will move on to, let's see, item number 8A, which is old business, renaming the Healdsburg Community Center the Abel DeLuna Community Center. And Director Themig, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. First slide, please. You can go to the next slide. The action requested tonight is to adopt a resolution waiving the Healdsburg Park naming policy and renaming the Healdsburg Community Center the Abel DeLuna Community Center. Next slide, please. So a little background. In 2023, the city launched a public process to name our new park in the Sajo Hills development. We received 32 naming proposals with 28 different naming recommendations, all of them outstanding recommendations. And there was significant public support for two of those naming proposals. One was Laura Fish Summersall, and the second was Abel DeLuna. On October 21st of this year, City Council chose to move forward with naming the new park the Laura Fish Summersall Park. And as part of that action at that meeting, they requested the staff bring back a resolution to rename the Healdsburg Community Center in honor of Mr. DeLuna. Next slide, please. So a little background, Mr. DeLuna was born in Mexico. He immigrated to the United States and settled in the Napa Valley area around Calistoga, where his brother lived. The family, the DeLuna family, were in the agriculture business, picking grapes, pears, and prunes. After he improved his English, he went to work for the Office of Economic Opportunity in Napa. And Abel and his wife, Amelia, a beautician, moved to Healdsburg after they were married in 1970. Next slide, please. So in 1972, Mr. DeLuna opened La Luna Market on Center Street, where Casa de Mole is currently located. But what is really important is that he had other businesses in town as well. He operated the Avon Theater, which is currently the Raven Theater, and it was well known for its Spanish language films, as well as more modern films. Mr. DeLuna continued on his entrepreneurial journey, operating and buying a small network of radio stations, forming the Luna Music Company, and served as a senior VP at Sony. Next slide, please. So Mr. DeLuna was heavily engaged in the city's community and in the civic organization of the city. He was a respected business leader and civic leader as well. He became the first Mexican-American elected to Healdsburg City Council in March of 1976, and he served as mayor from March of 1978 to April of 1980. And at age 31, he became the youngest and first Latino mayor of Healdsburg. Next slide, please. So the requested action tonight, again, is to adopt a resolution waiving the Healdsburg Park naming policy and renaming the Healdsburg Community Center the Abel DeLuna Community Center. And I know Mr. DeLuna is in the audience tonight, as well as some of his family, so I want to make sure to acknowledge his attendance. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? All right. Well, I'll open it up to public comment. Anybody have any public comment on this item? All right. Come on up. If you could state your name. Wait, let's make sure that the mic is on.
My name is Rosaura Garcia, and good night, everybody. I'm sorry, I was not here for the first part of why we're renaming the Healdsburg Community Center. And I think it's great that we're trying to name somebody from the community and somebody, the first Latino mayor and all of that. But I was thinking, as far as raising funds for the community center and to be able to continue having funds for it, I was thinking maybe we could consider the idea of selling the naming rights every 5 years, like the Luther Burbank Center did. And that way profiting out of it. Like, for example, for 5 years, it could be the Kendall Jackson Community Center. For another 5 years, it could be the Jay Winery Community Center, and so on. It's just a thought.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. Seeing no one, I'll bring it back for discussion and action. Who wants to kick us off? Councilmember Kelly?
I'm so delighted to have this item brought back before us. And I think, when we first heard the item in October talking about the park naming and the lead up to that conversation, it was a wonderful opportunity to learn about the impact that Mr. DeLuna has had on people in the Healdsburg community. A lot of folks who have now, who grew up here, but maybe aren't as connected with the city. People we hadn't heard from ever before, or people we hadn't heard from in a long time. And we started receiving dozens, hundreds of emails, letters in the mail that were printed and put in our inboxes or scanned. I mean, lots of communication from people, even people that I didn't know had any connection to Healdsburg that a guy that I knew in Oregon reached out saying he was my high school football coach or my high school soccer coach, and he changed the course of my life forever. And some really special stories that I think, but for us talking about this naming opportunity, whether it's the park or the community center, we never would have had the opportunity to hear some of those stories. And it was a really incredible reminder of what people can do to impact young people's lives in our community, so many volunteers. And I think a lot of the work that Mr. DeLuna did in the community was not just what he was doing, as a council member or as mayor, but also as a volunteer in other parts of the community, and how that made this lasting impact on so many people's lives. And it was really touching to get to hear those stories and to learn about really how connected people's relationships with Healdsburg is because of their relationship with former Mayor DeLuna. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that we really did have an opportunity to hear from, dozens of folks in the community and beyond, many people who have since moved to Windsor, which was also heartbreaking to hear, that we really have someone here in our community and here tonight. And I also think historically, I never knew that Mr. DeLuna was so young. When he was 31 when he became mayor, which is why we get to see his young face here with us tonight so many years. Wonderful. But really, the community center in Healdsburg, formerly the Foss Creek School, but now the community center, has become really this incredible hub of activity that's growing each and every day with new programming, and the new childcare center that we helped to open with the YWCA, and Clinica Alianza, Alliance Medical Center that's there, and Corazon, and other arts groups and cultural groups, that the Baile Folklorico group that practices there. So it's really become this amazing community hub of activity. And I think having this historic name that references our first Mexican-American mayor of Healdsburg will be a touching way to acknowledge that site and what it means for our historic community, but also what it can mean going forward as a place for gathering and honoring our community.
Thank you. Councilmember Edwards?
Yeah, I think that this is I've got some correspondence about not knowing who Mr. De La Luna is, and I think that this naming can be an inspiration to people to show that, you know, in this small town, if you work hard, you can get ahead. And to encourage people who might not have ever thought I could be mayor to look back and say, hey, this was happening in Healdsburg long before a lot of other towns. Healdsburg has a history of accepting our minorities and working and going forward as a community. So I hope that this can be an inspiration with your name when people see that name. They may not know who you are, but it might ask a question of who is this? What is it named after? And to show opportunities and actually, hopefully, can be a spark for someone else to follow in your footsteps from this community. So I want to thank you, and I really appreciate what your name has the potential of doing on that building.
Thank you. Councilmember Harrod?
Thank you. I remember when Mr. DeLuna was our mayor. I was very young, but it was it was significant then, and it's significant now. And I just want to acknowledge what a milestone that was. And I think it's really important that we finally have an opportunity to recognize that, and also to recognize that hopefully this naming is a turning point in a broader recognition of the role of the Latino community in our town, which has been substantial and has not been recognized as much as it has been. So I think I'd like to think of this naming as for Mr. DeLuna and his role in the community, but also for his whole family who is here, a large family who not just helped him, but made their own contributions, and then the Latino community as a whole. So that's the broader significance of this naming of the community center, and I think it's a very proud moment for Healdsburg.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, when I first heard about the possibility of naming the park after Mr. DeLuna and his story, I was very impressed. I had been unaware that we had our mayor back in the 70s, Latino mayor, and it just seemed totally fitting for the city to be able to recognize that history. I think the time was very, very different in the 70s than it is now, and especially for the city of Healdsburg. We've done a lot of work on inclusion and DEI, and it's important work. But I think also remembering our history, I think this points that out, and I think that's really important as well. So to kind of look back and then look to the future and continue to do the work, I'm very, very pleased, and thank you and your family for all you've done. And we look forward to having a naming plaque soon. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, you may leave Healdsburg, but Healdsburg never leaves you. And I appreciate that you're back here, and I agree with everything that was said here tonight. I had the opportunity to have breakfast with your family, well, you and your family, up at Peppers, was a couple weeks ago, and it was fun talking about some of how Healdsburg was back in the day, some of the issues, and how they compared to today. And so I absolutely support this, and at this point, I would entertain a motion. And Councilmember Harrod?
I'd be honored to make a motion to adopt a resolution waiving the Healdsburg Park naming policy and renaming the Healdsburg Community Center the Abel de Luna Community Center.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. A roll call, please.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Harrod?
Yes.
Councilmember Kelly?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mitchell?
Yes.
Mayor Hagley?
Yes. Congratulations. Would you like to say a few? Don't forget to push the button.
Mr. Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, City Council, City Manager, thank you very much. It is an honor for me and my family, the recognition of what we did in Healdsburg. But I think it's more important to our Mexican and Latino community that they can see that there is a Spanish name on a building, that they can feel part of our community. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate it.
Before we move on, could we get a picture with you and your family?
Oh man, you tried to steal your gavel? Nice, thank you. Thank you.
So one thing in Healdsburg, we do a lot of ribbon cutting, so I'm assuming there will be some formal ceremony at some point. So that'll be fun and we'll keep you posted so everybody can come back up. Like, congratulations. All right, with that, we will go back to the consent calendar. I'm sorry, no. Oh yeah, okay, consent calendar. And I need to recuse on item number 6A because I live within 500 feet of the park. So I would entertain a motion on approving everything but 6A.
I move to approve items 6B, C, D, E, and F.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. So I will scooch back, Vice Mayor.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion to approve item 6A.
I move to approve item 6A.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you.
All right. Next up is a public hearing. First public hearing to receive input on the composition of districts and number of districts for district-based council elections.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. I have the pleasure of introducing our consultant this evening, Mr. Paul Mitchell from Redistricting Partners, who's going to kick off our presentation and get us through the majority of it. And then Jeff has a couple slides and then I will close it out.
Welcome. And just so you know, we're pretty excited to actually see you in person because we've all.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thanks a lot and thanks for having me. I believe you'll be helping me with the slides. Just to start off, Redistricting Partners is a firm that does work in redistricting and districting, racially polarized voting analysis, and other work around the California Voting Rights Act and the Federal Voting Rights Act. We're busiest in the beginning of the decade, obviously, after the census, when agencies are doing redistricting. And in California, in the last redistricting cycle, we did over 100 redistrictings from little water districts to the city of LA, big counties in the state. We also were the demographer for the state of New York and city of New York and worked in about 15 states. We also work not just for agencies, but we've worked for nonprofit organizations doing analysis of districting. We worked for the New Mexico Ethics Commission and the establishment of an independent redistricting commission there. And so we do a lot of work in this area, and we're really happy to be working with you on this process. I'm just going to do a little trigger here to kick off and go to the first slide. This is what we're basically going to cover, and it'll take a while. I'm happy to take questions. I can be here as long as you want to kind of go through anything that you're concerned about. And then also for members of the public who want to watch this, the presentation will be online. And we'll be repeating portions of this in each of our meetings so that people can kind of catch up. So first off, California Voting Rights Act will be a thing I'll cover. The difference between districting and redistricting. The Federal Voting Rights Act, what gerrymandering is, what the required criteria are, the mechanics of the process, and then go into your census data and talk about your schedule. So first off, the California Voting Rights Act, people oftentimes hear that and they think that it's a broad, expansive law having to do with the big voting issues like the Federal Voting Rights Act. But the California Voting Rights Act is really specific to one thing. It only looks at cities, counties, agencies, water districts, and everything in California that have at-large elections. And it says that anything is an at-large election if it isn't individual members being elected only by the people within one district. In California, we have all kinds of different systems, or used to have all kinds of different systems with multi-member districts or areas where people would have to live in, but everybody in the city would be voting, things like that. So a lot of different systems, but in the state law, an at-large election system is anything but single-member districts. And it says that you can't have single-member districts if you have any racially polarized voting. And racially polarized voting in the California context is essentially differences in voting patterns based on ethnic populations, where they live and where they vote. And really specifically looking at those kind of protected classes under the Federal Voting Rights Act, Asian, Latino, Black voters, but also religious minorities, so like Chaldeans or other ethnic minorities like Armenians, other things like that in different parts of the state would be kind of the groups that you would look at for that kind of polarized voting. So one of the things that the California Voting Rights Act does is it builds on the ideas from the Federal Voting Rights Act, but really makes it a lot lower threshold. Under federal law, we've always had a requirement potentially to go to districts if the at-large election system was diluting the voting power of minority groups. But it required proof that you could draw majority minority districts. That was one key difference between the federal law and the state law. Under the state law, you only have to be able to show that you can draw districts where the minority population has the ability to influence the outcome of an election. It's a different, nondescript, really kind of what that number is isn't as clear as it is in majority minority. The CVRA also set up a whole construct for enforcement where it said, if you sue somebody, a city or a county or a school district or a water district, you're automatically guaranteed payment as the attorney. Under the Federal Voting Rights Act, the last city that was sued in California, Santa Maria, it was over a decade, and it was years and years and years for those plaintiffs' attorneys to ever see any kind of payment for their for the violation. Under the California Voting Rights Act, it's just they can sue and then they can get a check, and it's basically a guarantee. Now, one of the things about the California Voting Rights Act and some laws that were passed more recently is it creates this safe harbor that says if you follow a process that's outlined in the law, you can restrict any potential legal fees. And so that's where we'll talk about the 5 hearing structure that can be followed here. So I will say redistricting over and over and over, but we are doing a districting. So apologies, it's called Redistricting Partners. We'll say redistricting, we'll talk about the active redistricting. Well, you are actually only doing a districting, but it's kind of like when I make my, mole enchiladas and I make refried beans at home from scratch. I only fry them once. So they're refried beans, but they're really once fried beans. That's what we're gonna be doing here. We're gonna be doing districting, but we're just gonna call it redistricting because that's the terminology that's most commonly used. Now, what does districting change? It changes how you run for office, how you get elected to office. Does it change your role or how you perceive your role on the city council? No. It really is an election system portion of the process. It doesn't mean that you have to say, oh, well, I only represent these voters. You can still represent the entire city and the interests of the entire city. It's just that districting determines who votes for you and where you have to live in order to run for office. So again, it doesn't change how you govern. Now, some cities do. When you go to Sacramento and you meet with a council member, on their door to their office, it says council member so-and-so representing the neighborhoods of, and they literally list it out. And on some council members' business cards, I've seen them actually put the neighborhoods that they represent. There's nothing legal about that. They are choosing to view their role that way. The California Voting Rights Act doesn't require that. So what's important to note about redistricting is that it's trying to balance 2 things. One is it's trying to balance the voting power of your communities so that they have equal representation, equal voting power. The second thing they're trying to do is make sure that they have the same voice in decision making. And I'll kind of illustrate that distinction. One is if you have a district that are equally sized, then everybody's vote for their council member is equal. If you had a district like literally I've seen a redistricting once where there were 100,000 people in one district and 12,000 people in another district. So that's how the district, it was for a community college board that hadn't redistricted in 50 years. and their cities had changed so much underneath there that they had these districts, one would be really huge and one would be really small. So the voting power in the really big district was diluted relative to the voting power in the very small district. The other thing on the representation was the representative power was different too. So if you lived in a district with 100,000 people versus somebody who lived in a district with 12,000 people, essentially it would take 8 times more people to go to their representative to have the same voice as one person in a really small district. And so the idea with redistricting is to balance that. And so that's why when we draw districts, we're going to draw them to be equally sized. And we're going to look both at the total population and also the potential voting population. The Voting Rights Act does break down this idea like we've talked about with majority-minority districts. That's called Section 2. So if you hear people talk about Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, that has to do with the majority-minority districts. A lot of people remember Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which isn't enforced anymore. It's still there, but it just isn't enforced based on a recent Supreme Court decision. And like I've said, the California Voting Rights Act really is just focused on at-large systems. So under Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, there are 3 tests. It's called the Jingles tests. And the first test is that idea that an area has to have a majority-minority. We know, having looked at your community, you don't have the potential to create an area where more than 50% of the population would be a protected class. So I'll go through that data later, but that's just to know you don't even pass the first test of Jingles. The second and third test of Jingles have to do with that racially polarized voting, meaning that an ethnic population is voting cohesively and that the white population, in most cases, is voting cohesively against the interests of the minority population. So if somebody talks about Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act, or if the attorneys are having any questions, it's these 3 tests that you have to pass in order to fall under Section 2, and you don't even fall under the first. Go to the next slide. And we can go to the next slide because essentially we know we don't qualify there. So gerrymandering. This is one of those things where I say I do redistricting and people say, oh, you do gerrymandering. It's like the only thing they remember from high school. And this is the map that we saw in high school, which was Governor Gary in Massachusetts having his name associated with this salamander dragon-shaped political cartoon. It's kind of the only thing we remember Governor Gary for. It's his namesake. He was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. Nobody remembers that. But he is known for this map that wasn't even his map. It was the legislature's map. And this is kind of a historic thing. It's over 200 years old now, and we think, no, we don't see those anymore. But if you look at the next slide, that's an actual state Senate district that the legislature drew before the Redistricting Commission was created. And to me, it still has the talons and the wings and the head. But gerrymandering does still happen. It happens, it's pretty prolific around the state. We're going to do a process that's going to be open, transparent. All the decisions are going to be discussed and made in this forum, and we're going to ensure that this doesn't involve any gerrymandering. Next slide. When you do, if you go to like a graduate level study of elections and law, and you get into this idea of gerrymandering, oftentimes they'll show this kind of a graphic as a way to explain how gerrymandering works functionally. You can think of this area as a town and it's got, 5 yellow populations and 4 green populations. And so in a normal voting system, the yellow population would dominate over the green in most elections, you would think. And if you were to draw districts and say, let's just draw some rational districts, go to the next slide, you might draw something like this. 3 horizontal or 3 vertical sets of lines. And in both scenarios, you would elect here 2 members that are from, being voted where the yellow community has the strongest voice and 1 being elected where the green community has the strongest voice. But can you see already how to gerrymander this? Go to the next slide. Voila. We've now drawn it so that the green is the majority of 2 districts and the yellow is the majority of only 1. So that's essentially how gerrymandering can work. It's taking the map drawing process and trying to manipulate it in a way in order to give a group that doesn't have, the proper share in a normal set of districted lines, but gives them an inordinate share under new lines. And when we think about redistricting and gerrymandering, we're usually thinking about partisan gerrymandering. That's what we think about with like congressional districts. And you can see even the most recent election that we saw, you can see states where the gerrymandering actually contributed to who controls the House of Representatives in DC right now. It was decided basically by map drawers, not by the public, because of gerrymandering in a number of states. And the Supreme Court has taken themselves out of the job of determining whether something's a political gerrymander. They basically said the math is too confusing, we're out. Racial gerrymandering is another type of gerrymandering that the courts have been willing to still engage in, adjudicating and trying to eliminate racial gerrymandering, although that's also something that's a little bit teetering in recent Supreme Court decisions. There's a lot of concern about the long-term ability of the courts to be able to stop racial gerrymandering. Another kind of gerrymandering that is prolific is incumbent gerrymandering, where you can imagine a district that goes down and then there's an arm that reaches out to somebody's house and then comes back and then the district continues further. I've seen some crazy incumbent gerrymandering. There was one in the Central Valley that went down the 99, went across, grabbed literally one house and then went back down the 99. We've seen things like this, the city of Ojai, where we came in and did the districting in 2021. We saw the map and we said, how is this working? What is the deal with this? All these three districts meeting in this one middle, and it's like splitting a census block into three pieces. Why did they do that? Oh, 3 council members live in the same housing project. Oh, okay. So it wasn't a housing project, but it was the 3 council members living essentially in the same set of apartment buildings. So incumbent gerrymandering is something we are not going to do as well. I don't know where any of you live. I don't know where any potential candidates live. I will not be using that data to help make decisions. It's something that's not allowed under the Fair Maps Act anymore. And it allows us to do districting that doesn't consider individuals, only consider the public. Next slide. So the criteria, the basic criteria that we're going to follow in this redistricting process are these 4 things. And each of these I'm going to kind of dive into a little bit and talk about. The first I've kind of touched on already, which is the idea that districts are going to be relatively equal size. Let's go to the next slide and I'll show what that looks like. So equal sized in redistricting doesn't mean like space. It doesn't mean voters. It means people. And so you might have districts that are larger and smaller, but they're going to be drawn in a way so that the biggest district is no more than 10% larger than the smallest district. Some people think of that as like a 5% up, 5% down kind of cushion, but you could theoretically have, 4 districts that are 2% under and 1 district that's 8% over, as long as it's within 10 points, largest to smallest. Then under the CVR, under the Fair Maps Act, you're required in municipalities in California to have a 10% total deviation. And that is like a binary. You're either under the deviation limit or you're over it. It's not saying that if you find a plan that's 6% deviation, that's better than a plan that's 7%. Or one that's 1% is somehow better than a plan that's 5%. As long as you're under that 10%, you're golden. There's not a distinguishing factor after that. Contiguous is the idea that districts don't hop and jump around, that they're whole pieces. And there's 2 concepts in contiguous. One is that literally they don't hop and jump. They are not disconnected. Now, some cities themselves are disconnected, and so there's ways to manage what they call an island, which is like a disconnected part of a city, and making sure that it's joined to the city. But within a city, if there's not a reason for that to be disconnected, then it's not allowed. There's also a thing called functionally contiguous. And the idea of functionally contiguous is the area that you're drawing, contiguous by the way people drive it, by the way people live in the community. I mean, you could take a satellite photo and draw a district that goes from one side of a mountain range to the other, but really somebody couldn't go from one side of the mountain range to the other without going entirely out of the district and coming back in somewhere else. There's an idea called travel contiguity, meaning that you could literally travel from one place to the other within the district. So we'll talk about that as we draw lines. If we see a line that you say, oh, well, that doesn't make sense because you can't get from here to here, we might consider that not to be contiguous. This is a map in Santa Clara County as a city where they drew this purple district that is not contiguous. You literally have like 3 different parts on that purple district that don't touch each other. And so that is an illegal map. Next slide. This is a district that I point out the idea of functional contiguity. This is Davis. And somebody had proposed doing a map that had 5 kind of, vertical districts. But the challenge was that that part of South Davis, which if you drive towards Sacramento, that is the freeway, that's where the railroad line goes through. You literally can't get from that parts of that green 4 district to the parts of 5 district without going out of it. So you have Mace Boulevard and Richards as the 2 kind of points where the city joins from South Davis district, from South Davis to North Davis. And so it had to be drawn as a district like that long, as opposed to stacking up vertical boxes, because the idea of making sure that the district stayed functionally contiguous and that it was, it made sense. Maintaining communities of interest. This is kind of the thing we're going to focus on almost entirely in this process, is identifying communities of interest and making sure that we can maintain them as, together in maps for the purposes of strengthening their ability to kind of fight for the issues that they care about within their area. So there are, obviously I've talked a lot about kind of the Voting Rights Act communities of interest, the ethnic populations, language populations, and so on. But what we're going to be doing a lot of in the community of interest discussion is looking at the more subjective kind of open-ended communities of interest. So communities of interest can involve race. So somebody could come up and say, the Latino community is here, and this is where we want to, maintain this strength of this community of interest. But because we're dealing with Voting Rights Act issues and equal protection, we can't draw districts with race as the predominant factor, but we can include them as part of the process and how we think about lines. So we'll talk more about that, but it's a little bit of a delicate situation with dealing with race and redistricting. Before I go to the next one, just on communities of interest, there are basically 3 things that we're looking at when we talk about a community of interest. And so when people come up here, they will have things on the website where they can submit a form, or, maybe at a public meeting, they talk about the community of interest. There's 3 things we're going to look for. The first is, can they identify their community of interest? What is it? What does it have a name? What are they calling it? So let's say it's skateboarders. That's the community of interest. We're a bunch of skaters. So they've got a name, you know what it is, we get it. There's something that keeps them together. The second thing is, can you map it? Is there a way to look at the city and say, oh, this is where that population resides? Well, you could map like renters, right? And that could be a community of interest as renters, and you could map where are more renters. You could you could see like a community of interest that was more people who live on a hillside, and you could map where people live on the hillside. In some cities, you can see a community of interest like people who are missing, who don't have sidewalks or don't have streetlights. And then you can map that. So those are the first kind of 2 things. Can you name it and tell what it is? And then can you actually physically map it? And the third thing we're going to look for is, do you have any engagement with it? Is there something you do as a body, policy-oriented, that affects that community of interest? So when this is very agency specific. If we were doing the districting for the water district, they might say, hey, Paul, people in higher elevations pay a different water rate, so we want people in higher elevations to be a community of interest. And then you come to the school board and they're like, well, we don't care if they're higher elevation. What we care about is, the needs that those students have in that area. or socioeconomic status. And then we come to the city and they say, hey, we don't really care about elevation, but we really do care about businesses and needs and sidewalks and streetlights and things that we are involved in helping, provide. So those three things are what we're going to look at. The next criteria is that district lines are easily understandable. They make sense to people. They see the map and they go, okay, I understand how that was put together. And that we're trying to follow both natural boundaries like rivers and mountains and so on, and also man-made boundaries like streets or, where different populations are. And the next is to keep districts compact. And that doesn't mean small. It means under California law, let's see if I think there's another slide here that shows this. So compact in nature is a sphere. Like boxes and spheres are more compact shapes. And in different states, they have all kinds of different criteria. There's like 30 different, PhD theses done on measuring compactness. It's a crazy field. But in California, we've changed the compactness line, rule. Let's see if the next. So our compactness rule is a district is compact if it doesn't bypass nearby population to get far away population. It's like the worst word salad the legislature could dream of. But what that means is a district is compact if it doesn't go to far away population, bypass near population. So let's say we were starting a district over here and we were going across to the first 4 people, and then we went over to here and then got the next 3 people over here. It was bypassing the nearby population to go across and get a far away population. That would mean it's not compact. And this is the city of Martinez, and this is the reason why they had to define compactness in the state law and why they changed the law in the Fair Maps Act to outlaw this kind of a districting. This districting was done in order to maintain incumbents. 4 incumbents lived within half a mile of each other. And this district number 3 stretches all the way through the downtown area, Martinez, and then out. And it's so narrow and disconnected that when they actually converted it to precincts, the precincts didn't even touch. It's connected through like going down the freeway and such. And if you look at that non-compact area, go to the next slide. That's what the districts look like now. So based on the new law, you have districts that are more naturally shaped and where you're not running around some nearby population to go get some faraway population. Let's get to the next slide. So there are other criteria. Like I said, we cannot consider incumbents or candidates or any individuals where they live in the districting. We can't draw districts to advantage or disadvantage a political party, but honestly, other than in San Diego, we don't really ever see that. San Diego is oddly partisan in their city council elections. It had been previously, but that's really not a big thing usually. We are going to hold a number of hearings, and there's a process for that that I'll go over at the end. And then all the information from this redistricting process is going to be posted to the city website, and it needs to be online for the next 10 years, or in your case, you're going to be doing a redistricting before that 10 years is up. So all this information, this presentation, all potential draft maps, all documents associated with this process are going to be public on the website. Now, I'm going to get into some of more detail of how redistricting is done, and then we can wrap this up, and I'll be happy to take some questions. So, let's go back. So the data we use in redistricting, the primary data we use in redistricting is from the census. And most people think of the census and they think of one thing, and that's that once every 10 years total population count. And that is a part of what we will use. But I want to kind of talk about the census and the data and how it works a little bit more in depth, and then talk about a second census data set so that you guys understand when we're talking about numbers, what we're actually, what the source of those numbers is and what we're actually talking about. So first off, the census data is actually two pieces of data. Census data is always a number, 5. There are 5 people. And then an area like the square or box or weird shape that that 5 people goes into. So it's kind of like the 5 people are the honey and the area is like the honeycomb that everybody goes into. And so census data makes no sense if you don't have both of those pieces. So we're going to be talking about data, numbers, and census areas or census blocks and things that we'll talk about in a second here. So we always have to think about census having both of those kind of things. And then if that's not confusing enough, census data also comes in a variety of types. The number one type we think about is that point in time, every 10 years, you know, census number that you get. And we know that that's based on like the 2020 census, and it's April of 2020. How many people were living in this one spot? 5 people. Really simple, really easy, no math. There's another census called the American Community Survey. It's ongoing. I actually got a mailer a couple months ago that said I need to complete the census now. It's not that decennial census, every 10-year census. It's the American Community Survey. 3.5% of the population every 10 years gets this survey, and they take that data to say, you know, more about the population. They ask not just the basic questions, but they'll ask dozens of questions. How many people are in your household? What languages are spoken? Are there citizens or non-citizens in the household? And all this other information. That American Community Survey also gives you a number that goes into that honeycomb of the census blocks. What's different about that number is it's an average. And it has a margin of error like a poll does. And it might be a number of 5, just like it does in the regular census number. But that number 5 will actually come with plus or minus 12, something crazy like that. And it'll say 5, but that's 5 based on 5 years worth of data averaged. So that 5 is a number that's an average of the last 5 years to get that number 5. And so we're going to see both types of data in this process. Some data you might say, Paul, is that the actual real census or is that the American Community Survey? Is that an estimate or is that the real number? And so that's a difference in terms of how that works. So all of these data points go into the honeycomb, and you'll hear the terms block, block group, and census tract. Those are the different shapes of those honeycombs, and they're nested. Go to the next slide. Go to the next slide. Census blocks are teeny, teeny, little bitty. Sometimes there's 0 population, sometimes they're 5, sometimes there's 17 people, sometimes there's 20, but they're really small. They're not like street blocks, but they can sometimes be just a street block. Next slide. All those census blocks fit into census block groups. And to me, when I see that, it's like a little bit of like just, oh, that's a lot calmer than the prior picture. Now we're talking about areas where you've got a census block group and it's around 1,500 people. Next slide. And then you have census tracts, and that's groups of blocks. So it's blocks, blocks make up block groups make up tracts. They're all perfectly nested. And so one interesting thing about it is when we get that decennial census, we get it in that block and we get those numbers. But when we get that American Community Survey, that estimated data, it comes in those block groups. So it's actually not even in the blocks. We have to move the data around. Next slide. So the decennial census is called PL 94-171. That's the official decennial census based on April 1st, 2020. Even though it's now 2024 and you'll be doing most of this work in 2025, we still have to use the 2020 numbers. We did the Napa districting in 2019 and we had to use the 2010 numbers. So we can't use estimates or any other data for your total population. We were stuck with the 2020 data. One thing about the data that I haven't dove into is that the census data we use in California is adjusted. Now, it really doesn't affect you guys much at all. It really affects places like Kern County, because what they've done in the census, they've taken the prison population out. So Kern County has a big prison with 15,000 people in it. Those 15,000 people are taken out, and those people are disseminated to where they were living, where they were before they were arrested. And so there might be like 1 or 2 extra people added to your census in small areas, but it's going to be, we haven't seen it really affect anything. It's just a tiny, tiny number. And the idea is to create a more equitable redistricting statewide so that you don't get more congressional members for places that have a lot of prisoners, right? And that it's more distributed fairly. The American Community Survey I've talked about is the estimated data. And one of the most important things in that estimated data, the one we're going to be talking about the most, is called CVAP, Citizen Voting Age Population. The citizen voting age population you can think of as like the eligible voters. We don't talk about voters so much in the redistricting process as we talk about the eligible voters. The reason is that in some states, when they started going in and doing Voting Rights Act cases to try to create more equitable districts, and they were looking at voters, the state said, oh, we'll make this easy. We'll just get rid of the voting. We'll make it harder for people to register, and we'll change the numbers that way as opposed to really dealing with it. So in the federal courts, they always look at the eligible voter population, that citizen voting age population, rather than registered voter numbers. Now, finally, we're at the map of the city of Healdsburg, and we'll work with your city to make sure that every little inch of this is correct. The census sometimes does have errors in the boundaries of the cities, particularly if the counties haven't communicated that to the census recently. In this map, you can see those islands. If there's something that we need to figure out, we'll adjust this as we go through the process, but that's what we have right now for your city boundaries. Next slide. Now, when we do districts, you're going to see columns for every district. Since we only have one map here, there's only one column. And you can see your total population just over 11,000. This total census table at the top, that's that point in time decennial census number. So 11,000 based on the decennial census. When we look at the Latino population, you can see 34.5% Latino population, 34.6. The next table is the citizen voting age population, that eligible voter population. Again, now that is an estimate based on a 5-year average, and that brings your eligible voter population essentially down to 8,700 voters, 8,758. Now, what's notable is look at that Latino citizen voting age population. It drops all the way down to 19%. That is a pretty big drop compared to like how we see in other cities. So that means that a lot of your Latino population is either kids, so they're under 18, or they're non-citizens. We're going to draw them when we draw districts into the districts and count them for the purposes of determining the size of the districts. But if somebody says, what percent Latino is this district? We're going to talk about the percent Latino in terms of its potential voting power. So we're going to be looking at that citizen voting age population. And we've looked in the city, just nominal first check. The highest census block group, Latino, that we've seen is kind of in the mid 30%. Nowhere close to the 50% that you would need or have to, create a majority minority district. So we're talking about the ability maybe to create Latino districts that are 25, 28, 30% Latino, but you're not going to be creating districts likely that are, 40% Latino, something like that. We can go to the next slide. So there are some discussions that have happened around the state about alternative voting options to the CVRA. But I want to go back to very beginning, one of the first things I said about the CVRA, and it's that it applies to anything that is considered an at-large election system. And an at-large election system is defined in the state law as anything but individual districts only, voting for the person who lives in that district. So single-member districts is the only way to be completely outside of the purview of the California Voting Rights Act. There are theoretically, like let's say you came into this process and you said there's racially polarized voting and we're going to convert to districts. And somebody else came and said, hey, but we can solve the racially polarized voting piece by coming to some alternate election system. Some places have tried to do this. None have effectively implemented one, but it has been discussed. The ideas of using ranked choice voting, using cumulative voting, which is another potential system, or doing citywide single voting. And these are things that I can talk about in more detail, but around the state, we've seen places try to go to one of these systems, like Mission Viejo recently voted to go to one of these types of systems, but then had to dial it back, and now they're being elected in single-member districts. I think it was Santa Clarita tried to do this, and then they weren't able to, and so they're now in single-member districts. So there have been attempts, but none successful to kind of use that as a way to get out of the CVRA. And the catch is that if you convert to one of these systems and the next election system, somebody else comes in and sues you, there's nothing that would stop them because you're still not in single-member districts. Until you're in single-member districts, you'd always be vulnerable to a potential lawsuit. Next slide. So the other thing that you can decide as you do this conversion is the structure of your election system. So do you want to have 5 council members as you're currently elected? Or do you want to have one citywide mayor and 4 districts? And this is something that is completely up to you. The only input we would have at Redistricting Partners is, as vendors, having done a lot of these conversions, is to try to make this decision up front so that the public can have input on the districting process with one version. They know what's happening, rather than kind of doubling all the confusion by having to figure out all these things with, you know, some people drawing 5 district maps, some people drawing 4 district maps. So the best suggestion we have is to figure out which way you want to go with this, and then that's what we would do all the community outreach with, and that's what we'd be trying to get public input on. But you're allowed to do either of those 2 systems, and we've been working with a number of cities that have done both. So I don't know if the staff wants to take on this one, but I'm also able to answer the question. Do you want to?
Sure, thank you. I'll take that. To reiterate, there's a few considerations here we wanted to put in front of the council that are different than just drawing the districts, which is the meat of what you've heard about tonight. But as Paul mentioned, some associated questions that come up as we start talking about shifting our model of how the council is put together, where we are looking for, this is an opportunity to move to something different if the council so desired, but we're looking for that direction fairly quickly for the reasons you just heard. After the next public hearing, it's time to start process with the community really in the lead of drawing maps, and it can be confusing to say the least to prepare those materials, but more importantly to put them out to the community with a couple of different scenarios about how many maps we'll have. With that said, we understand really, you heard about a couple alternatives on the prior slide. None of those have been really fully vetted under the CVRA. This council has already passed a resolution of intent to districts. So our expectation, our default understanding, I'd say, is that we're moving forward with the process of switching to districts. If there were questions about those, we're happy to take them to the extent we can. If there were an interest in exploring one of those options, what I'd actually recommend is that we continue down the process of districting, because the clock is ticking, as you all well know. We'll talk about the timeline in the end, and do analysis on the side, and what would have to be both demographic analysis and negotiations with the law firm that we heard from that kicked off this process. That's not something we're recommending at this point, but if there were an interest from the council in one of those voting system alternatives, let us know and we can talk about what that might look like. More immediately than what's in front of you, and you just heard, is the possibility of going to districts. Let's assume 5, it could be more, but 5 is what we have now, and I'll assume that for the sake of thinking through these options, with either 5 districts or 4 districts and a generally elected mayor. So this is something I know we've been talking about on the staff level. I know the council's been thinking about. We tried to put forth a few considerations for the council in terms of pros and cons of these different options. Obviously, option 1 here is 5 districts. We don't have districts now, but in terms of the role of the mayor, this is obviously very, very similar to what you have now. So the council, I think, already understands very well how that system works. I will, for the public and the community, I will just note, because it's maybe not obvious to everybody, when we talk about the role of the mayor, how is the mayor different from the rest of the council? Sometimes I've heard the mayor described as the first among equals. When it's time to vote, you all have whatever system we have for selecting a mayor, you all have 1 vote. And that doesn't change, but in our current system, the power of the mayor is a few things. One is to chair these meetings, which is a power, an honor, or a responsibility, depending on the night. But it is a different role, obviously. 2 is to issue proclamations. It's reserved in our code for the mayor. And then the 3rd is to serve as a spokesperson for the city council. So it's not always that way. Obviously, we have a vice mayor and different events come out in different ways. But in terms of who's likely to receive calls from the press, who's likely to be cutting that ribbon, that's the role of the mayor. So it's not dramatically different from the rest of the council, but it is a little bit different for sure. In terms of coming back to this idea of 5 districts, this is most consistent with what we have right now. It would be a relatively smooth transition to districts. Each council member would be elected from a district, but then the council, in terms of selecting a mayor each year, would operate just as it does now. So a relatively smooth transition. Doing this, as I think you all understand, can create a shared sense of leadership. We don't have a fixed rotations, but it's normal, I'd say common for council members to shift the role of mayor, as you may do tonight, and give different council members a chance to hold that role. So there can be value in that, and that anybody serving a full term or certainly multiple terms is very likely to have a chance to serve as mayor. So it's a shared sharing of that role amongst the council members, and that create a shared sense of leadership. And also the last point here, we think it probably best responds to the goal of the districting process. Whether or not everybody's on board with this under the CBRA, there's a prime grossly oversimplifying, but at large, bad, districts good. Districts do more in the mind of the CBRA to support communities of interest protected classes in being able to elect their candidates of choice. And with that in mind, having more districts and not having one of those at-large positions makes us kind of most consistent. I'd say most defensible with the CBRA, but as you heard, and we concur, plenty of cities have done 4 districts and 1 generally elected mayor, and that has not caused any challenges. We don't believe it would. But if we're trying to adhere to the spirit of the CBRA, we do so most fully by having 5 districts, not 1 at-large position. Next slide, please. And by contrast, there's definitely some pros on both sides of this. If the council were to go with 4 districts and a at-large mayor, there's a few things that could be positive with that. One is the mayor, to the extent that that's an important role, and I think it is, would be elected by the whole community, as opposed to with districts where somebody is serving with 5 districts, somebody serving in the role of the mayor who was never on the ballot for 80% of the community. You would have a system where everybody in the community gets a chance to vote on who's serving in that role. Presumably, in most cases, when there's an at-large mayor, that's the same term length of 4 years as all the other council members. Could be different. We've seen just down the road, we've seen 2-year terms for the mayor, so that's a possibility. But in either case, somebody serving in the mayor role for more than a year just has more time to get comfortable in that role, more time to get comfortable in the spokesperson role, and maybe more effective. And there can be greater deference to that position. I think it really depends on the mayor. I think it depends on the system. But when we have a mayor that's shifting often, I think it creates more among equals as opposed to the first among equals. If somebody's in that role for a longer period of time, I think there's a possibility, though it's not quantified in the powers, to enjoy greater difference, not authority necessarily, but settle into that role in a slightly different way. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, there's obviously much more that can be said about these different alternatives. The other I'll say is, for the sake of keeping it easy, I'm assuming at this point that it would be under either of those scenarios. It would be 5. We would stick to a council of 5. And so the question really before the council, is it 5 districts or is it 4 districts with a generally elected at-large mayor? It's not a binary choice, I'll acknowledge. You could add additional seats while you're at it. That would obviously result in smaller districts. So I think the concern for those of us who already have maybe a little bit of trepidation about going to districts at all, because the districts in the town of our size are small, the smaller they get, the easier it is to get elected, but also the more challenging it might be to see a candidate an interested and qualified candidate in each district each time those positions come up. So something to keep in mind. There's no magic number though. And you could look at additional seats with or without an at-large mayor. With all of that said, if the council would like to provide direction on that this evening, we will take it. It would be helpful to the process of starting our outreach and going out to the community with the process of drawing maps. But what we're suggesting here is no later than the second public hearing. As soon as that public hearing's over, the community can start the map drawing process. And as you've heard a couple of times now, we think trying to do that under two systems could be a challenge. So that's just as a reminder, January 6th. So we will take direction tonight if the council wants to give it. But the kind of next crack at it would be our next public hearing, which is the 6th. With that, I think I'll turn it over to Raina, who will talk a little bit about next steps in terms of the calendar, including that January 6th meeting and some of the community outreach engagement that we have planned for the next steps.
Good evening. Paul may go into more detail about these 5 public hearings later, but this is the tentative schedule for the 5 public hearings we will conduct on district elections. The first one's happening tonight. The second one will happen in a couple weeks, followed by 1 in February, 1 in March, and 1 in April. Next slide, please. So that covers the first bullet on this community engagement and outreach slide. The next one is we have scheduled a community meeting where the community will have the opportunity to come and ask questions on January 16th. The online tool will also go live after the January 6th City Council meeting. Staff will be attending a brunch at the Senior Center on a Friday. We continue our outreach via social media. The city webpage on district elections is up and running, as well as including updates in the biweekly newsletter. A brochure has been passed out to each city facility in both English and Spanish. There will be a citywide mailer included in the December utility bill in both English and Spanish. And one that didn't make it on here today is Jeff attended Rotary, where he spoke about district elections. Next slide. And that concludes our report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. I feel like I'm in school.
Sorry.
This is a great presentation. Thank you. So let's kick it off with some questions. Let's start down here. Councilmember Harrod, do you have any questions?
You used sort of a whimsical example for a community of interest. You said skaters, but how broad is that? Are the choices for that?
Well, literally anybody could come up here and say they're a community of interest. And I use skaters as an example because, believe it or not, my first political engagement as a student was when the city of Costa Mesa tried to ban skateboarding. And this is like out of an 80s movie, but it was like early 1990s, and they tried to ban skateboarding in the city. And I went to the city council meeting and said, and spoke. And but if a group did come forward in a city and say, hey, we are skaters and there's a skate park over here and it's not being supported. There's one city that I know during COVID filled the skate park with sand and hasn't since reopened the skate park. And so there's people who would say, that's my community, this is an area, I can map it, this is where we live. And so it's a community of interest and you could consider it in your line drawing. Now, if somebody came forward and said, we're left-handed and we're a community of interest, you can't really draw where the left-handed people live. I don't think you've segregated left-handed people anywhere. There's not anything you do unless maybe you have a left-handed proclamation or something, but I don't think you do much to affect their community, so it really wouldn't be valid. So that's a judgment you get to make. And it really is, how well does that proposal that somebody comes forward with or types in on an email or puts on a form, how much does that really seem to matter to you? And at the end of this process, we're literally going to do a memo. It's required by law that will list the different communities of interest that were discussed. And we'll talk about which communities of interest were kept within individual districts and which communities of interest had to be divided. And if they had to be divided, was it because the community of interest was on two sides of a major road that was used for a district line, meeting a different criteria, but in doing so, inadvertently dividing a community of interest? So we'll go through these and you'll balance those. That's part of why your role in the districting process is to understand the different communities of interest and try to balance keeping as many of them together And then if one does have to be divided, knowing that it has to be divided because of a higher rank criteria.
So these communities aren't going to show up in the census data at all. They're going to be basically volunteered by the community themselves, or else maybe one of us would identify them as such, right?
Some
And it can be
can
kind of
be.
anything.
Yeah, but some can be in the census. So if you said, hey, Paul, we think homeowners versus renters is kind of a community of interest, we have data in the census on homeownership by census block group. So we could look at that, or language requests, whether it's language ballot requests or data from the census on what languages are spoken somewhere. So when we look to the source of data for where a community of interest is, it could be the census, or like in Davis, when we did that redistricting, there was a study done on the bus routes and where students lived in the city. And so they used that data to try to show how to draw that community of interest. Really, it could be anything. And the source of the data for it could come from a number of different places. And generally, we can map, most things.
Thank you.
Councilmember Kelly?
With respect to some of like our land use issues within the city, I'm thinking about, I like the example you showed about the railroad track. Very few places you can actually cross over the tracks within town, although if you were looking at it from a bird's eye view, it would seem as though those neighborhoods. That's interesting. I was also curious about fire risk. Wildfire risk in our community is one of those things that in today's weather, out of mind, but in future drought years, might be more top of mind. We do have fire risk mapping and where people live in high fire severity zones, typically on the eastern portion of the city, and some of our hillside residents. So would that be something that potentially could be a community of interest of people who live in the high fire severity zone?
Absolutely. And the State Redistricting Commission used that in Orange County to draw the congressional district lines. The final decision on the final day of the State Redistricting Commission was moving some boundaries based on fire risk in communities that needed federal funding for fire risk and fire abatement issues. The question would be is, let's make sure that there's a connection between the city policymaking and the fire risk. And there likely is things that you do, programs you do to outreach to communities to talk about fire risk. And so, yeah, absolutely, that could be a way of looking at and mapping a potential community of interest.
What about with respect to other land use designations? So the way we have our zoning map, we have, specific neighborhoods that are, the majority of our city is R1 in terms of like where our voters live, because they're not living in industrial or commercial. But for our zoning designations, if it's an R1 6,000 square foot lot versus an R1 14,000 square foot lot, you can imagine that 14,000 or 20,000 square foot lot is typically where you find your larger single family homes, and your 6,000 square foot lots is where you find your typical kind of like subdivision style. Every fourth home is the same home that was built in the 70s or 80s. Are those designations or the way you look at land use within the city from like a overlay perspective, is that something that we should be taking into consideration? Because that might also lend itself to one of the protected classes.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if it doesn't lend itself to one of the protected classes, you might have different communities of interest around different housing types. And so we've taken like planning maps and overlaid it to cities when we look at districting, not only to look at like what are the current housing or current, zoning of an area, but the state law actually references historic as well. So like in Long Beach, there was a historic, Black community, and there was mapping of where that zoning was. And we used zoning maps from the 1960s and 50s to look at drawing communities of interest today when we did the Long Beach redistricting. So absolutely, those kind of things are great. And if we have those available, we can look at them, and there will be tools that we'll have to actually go in and maybe draw them. The one thing that will be a challenge potentially, we haven't gone in deep enough to look at your census blocks, but you might have census blocks that don't really conform to your zoning maps. And so there might just be some, using them almost as inspiration more so than using them as actual ways we're carving the exact lines.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Edwards?
Yeah, so when we're drawing these with these groups of interest, will that be if a citizen says, this is my group of interest, I want to draw maps around that? Will that be available, or they will be drawing the maps and then seeing if a group of interest is in that map?
Yeah, that's interesting. So there's two things just to bring up. First off, when we went through those, when she mentioned the hearings schedule, the first two hearings are going to be like this, informational. If people want to submit information about their community of interest or talk about their community of interest, that's great. We're also, by January, going to have the mapping tool online so people can go in and map these things. And the third hearing is the first hearing we're going to have actual maps. And those maps, we hope, will be reflective of a lot of different things we've seen the community input. Oftentimes, people do start with, here's my community of interest, and then they draw the line around their community of interest and then draw the districts based on that. Sometimes, though, people will start drawing the lines based on like maybe major roads. And then after they've drawn that line, they'll say, oh, this one area that happens to be in this one district is all R6000 zoning. And so I'm going to reference that when I talk about why this district is good. So there are sometimes maps that are drawn, and then you look at what community of interest testimony has been made, and you kind of try to fit as many of those communities of interest into a map, maybe make small adjustments from there. But both of those things are legitimate.
And then with a business or commercial districts, are those a community of interest and spread out, or they need to be in one?
So my favorite way for thinking about a commercial interest, because we're obviously not, if it's just like a business, you're not going to have population there. So the question is, what district does it go into? My favorite way of thinking about that is negative externalities, is what it's called. What that is that if there's a shopping center and traffic backs up one area on one major street to get into that shopping center, and the noise maybe from things that are happening in that plaza or something like that are affecting one neighborhood, that neighborhood should probably be with the plaza or the shopping center. So to think of in a bigger scheme, if you had a big sports stadium in a big city, you wouldn't draw it so that the big sports stadium is in a district that goes far away from where they hear the noise or have the population or the traffic congestion or the whatever negative effects of that stadium. You would have all the areas that feel the negative effects in the same area as the stadium so that the community can have a voice. So when we think about commercial areas, you might want to think, okay, here's the commercial area. Which neighborhoods use that commercial area? Which neighborhoods have to deal with the negative externalities of that commercial area? Same thing could be with a school. Where do the kids go to that school? And where do the neighbors complain about drop-off and the negative effects of having a school right near them? So that's the kind of things to think about with areas that have no population.
Okay, and you also mentioned that we might have to redo this before 10 years?
You have to redo it after the next census.
Okay.
So
it's
in
just-
2031, you'll have to do it for the 2032 election cycle.
Okay, and is it as simple as our population doesn't grow very much? We have some limitations. So is it a simplified process then? Do people kind of go, we didn't grow, there's nothing we needed to do? What have you found?
It used to be a simplified process. It used to be that, in fact, you could send a letter to the county registrar and say, we've reviewed our lines, we're still within the 10% deviation, we're just going to keep our existing lines. That was a process that most cities would do just to get past it, and the next redistricting they'd see if they have to adjust. But under the state law now, you still have to do the 5 hearings. So when you do 2032, even though the boundaries will only have been in place for a few election cycles, you're going to start from scratch effectively, talking about the area, allowing the public to submit maps. And in the end, you might pass the exact same maps you have, but they'll be rebuilt kind of from the ground up using the same community of interest discussion and looking at all the different factors. So there's no kind of like just continuing the same map and not going through the process under the current state law.
Okay, and then I had another question for Raina, that you said that there will be an email blast. Is that a new email address that people will register for it, or is that, will that be on the list of our agendas that you can subscribe to?
It's a little of both. It's existing to those who have already subscribed on our city website, and you still absolutely can subscribe.
All right, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
So I had a couple questions about the actual tool for drawing the map and kind of the hierarchy of how this would work. it seems like there's a lot of specifics that we have to meet
Mhm.
in order to have a district work. So how does that all get incorporated in it? And the community, as they're doing their maps, are you suggesting that they do the map for their community of interest or for the entire city, or kind of how does that work?
So first off, they can draw a map that is just a community of interest. There's actually a button on the tool. It's called Districtor. We'll do a demonstration for you once it's launched. But there's a ability just to draw a community of interest and name it. And you could draw 5 or 6 communities of interest and name it. And they don't have to be equal population. They don't have to be contiguous. They can overlap. It's just, these are areas that I want to talk about communities of interest. There's another button to click on to draw districts. And you can draw just one district, or you can draw all 4 or 5 districts. They can submit a partial map or a complete map. Now, you mentioned the idea that there's all these criteria, and they are ranked criteria. So districts have to be equal population, they have to be contiguous, they have to maintain communities of interest, they have to be compact. What's important to know is that these aren't perfectly ranked, meaning that you don't go into a situation where somebody says, well, mine are equally populated by 8%, and then the next criteria it's contiguous, and the next criteria community of interest, and somebody else comes along and says, well, mine is more perfectly equal, so it trumps yours. It's just that they need to meet all these criteria. And we'll work with the community as they submit maps. So if somebody submits a map and it's kind of close, maybe they forgot to assign some census blocks, we'll create a modified version of that map and label it as such, like map 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 modified, which will be doing any little bit of cleanup that we think needs to be done to that map to make it be something that you could actually adopt. And then we'll work with every map that's submitted and any maps that we create for you as draft maps, or any maps that you guys submit, or even if you do a live line drawing, we'll work with you to make sure that all those maps you're considering are kind of meeting all those criteria.
And then the other question is how, in communities that you've worked with, how much participation on the map drawing do you see? Is it a lot? Is it robust?
It varies. I'd say most cities will get more than a dozen maps. Some cities we've gotten over 100. We sometimes try to get input from the community at like public workshops, or we'll do something like an online training for people. And also sometimes like a local college professor will get involved and have his students submit maps. There's all kinds of ways that we get this public engagement. And then we have had agencies, I mean, one of the first times we ever did a public mapping tool was in City of Santa Ana. They spent an inordinate amount of money setting up a public mapping tool and got 1 submission. So it's gotten better. One thing that's really benefited this process is that a lot of people in your community have probably participated in the statewide redistricting, where they had online mapping tools, or watched the local redistricting and watched the county redistricting. And so it's not something that's as foreign to a lot of the public to be engaged. And so you might have people who submit maps who have submitted maps for other agencies.
Couple questions. So we kind of talked about it a little bit last time. So tonight, there are 3 of us that are getting sworn in for another 4-year term, elected by citywide. And then once we're done with the districts, then in 2 years, the district elections kick in. How is it determined which of those districts are going to be the ones up for election? Is that something we decide? Is that something that's
perfect? Yeah. So first off, I'll try to make this as simple as possible because it can get confusing. You had 3 people just get elected to 4-year terms. They're going to fulfill those 4-year terms, no matter what we do in these lines. In 2 years, you're going to have 2 seats come up. Those 2 seats that come up are going to be for 4-year terms under the new districts. And so in 2026, they'll get sworn in, just like we are here tonight. And you're going to say, voila, we have a system that's a hybrid, where you have 3 council members that were elected at large and 2 council members that were elected in districts. Next election cycle rolls around. Now the 3 that were sworn in tonight, now their seats are up 4 years from now. And after that election's over, you'll get sworn in like a night like tonight, and now everybody will be in districts. So the implementation of the districting happens over the course of 2 election cycles before we're actually in a system where everybody has been elected by districts. And that's in order to make sure that nothing that we do here undoes the election we just had. And make sure that everybody fulfills the terms that they were allotted by the voters. Now, when we draw maps, we will come up with a potential numbering system. I said the word potential very on purpose. A potential numbering system, what we generally do is if it's a 5-seat, we'll say districts 1, 3, and 5 come up in 2028, and districts 2 and 4 come up in 2026. And we just arbitrarily say that. And there'll be numbers on the map. Now, we will not consider where incumbents live when we draw these lines. But once you've passed a map, now you have the lines, they're all in place. Then you want to think about who are the 2 members who are up in 2024. And if they are in this new map you just adopted in 2 different districts, then let's just make those 2 districts the ones that come up in 2020, or the ones that were elected in 2022. Let's make those 2 council members in districts that will come up in 2026. And we number them that way so that there's the districts 2 and 4. And then the other districts 1, 3, and 5. So we don't consider where incumbents are in the drawing of districts, but once we actually get to the picking the order of the seats at the last hearing, then you can kind of look and say, like, what's the right thing to do to make sure that we don't just, for no reason, order these districts in a way that will disenfranchise one of the council members from being able to run for re-election.
Second question is, you mentioned, I just want to clarify, so we have to use the 2020 census. So like I live in Parkland Farms, north end of town. There are a number of projects that are being developed right now. We've got, Dry Creek Commons isn't close, but that's a number of units that are coming online at the North Village and Saggio Hills. So those housing developments that are in the pipeline that are moving forward but are not, haven't been built yet. So you are not taking into account the population from those when you're determining the districts. And then once we go to the 2030 census, then that's when the redistricting lines might move based on added population.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're not allowed to draw the lines. And it's actually an interesting thing that City of Davis, the South Davis and then North Davis, when I did their districting in 2018 before the census, they all said, hey, that north part of Davis up there, they're converting that farmland to buildings, apartment buildings, and there's a big population boom up there. And so we should shouldn't we draw districts based on, I can tell you there's going to be 2,000 more people there. Shouldn't we draw districts based on that future population? And the answer I had to tell them was, no, we can't. When the census came out, South Davis had more population than they thought because of density. The city council members could see the new development with their eyeballs. What they couldn't see with their eyeballs was that the apartments in South Davis were going from an average occupancy of 2.1 to an average occupancy of 2.3. And that actually meant more population was going in South Davis. So part of the reason why we don't do this just for, practical purposes is it's kind of hard to know what population is going to be like in the future. And our brains kind of but our brains, prioritize things that look like new and don't necessarily see things that happen slower in terms of density. The one tool you have in your toolbox is that 10% deviation. Let's say theoretically we were all convinced that that upper part of the city or some other part of the city was going to really boom in population or was undercounted in the prior census. You could kind of play with that deviation a little bit, and it might only be like 50 people or something like that kind of shift between districts so that all the other districts are at, 6% over, and that district is at 4% under to make up for the discrepancy in the census or in what you think about in terms of what the population really is today. That's the only tool you have. But the reality is everywhere I've seen that have sought to create that as one of the ways that they were going to deal with population growth was to use this, tool of the deviation. They talk about it at the front end, but by the time they're actually done drawing lines, they're not willing to like draw a district that does a weird jump across the street or divides a community of interest just to like meet that thing about trying to deal with future population. So
it's kind of interesting. So the numbers that you're going to be using include units that just didn't exist at the time of the census, like Mill District or Randall or.
and won't include people who moved to Kirkwood during COVID.
Okay.
There's both things happening. And that might not have affected you as much, but I know there's a bunch of population discrepancies because some of the more affluent areas, they didn't leave, they left their house vacant here and moved to Kirkwood for COVID, but the census counted them there, not in East Bay. So there's all that kind of stuff. And the census also is not a perfect vehicle. There's a lot of problems with the census itself.
Okay. If there's, one last question, go ahead.
I was just thinking about that the largest housing development that has happened in Healdsburg with market rate units was Enzo, and it wasn't counted in the census. So we have living there in 2020. So that would be an interesting way to account for it with respect to like the way we do the variations in the.
Councilmember Edwards?
We don't have districts, but we have precincts.
Mhm.
Will the precincts then go away to the new districts, or will their districts have distinct precincts in them? I don't know how that works with the county.
Registrars hate me. They don't hate me, but they hate this process. In some states, like in New Mexico where we did redistricting, the precincts are the dominant factors and you draw districts based on the precincts. In California, you draw the districts, and then the precincts follow. And so every election cycle, the county has to incorporate all the redistricting so that if we draw a line down Elm Street and Maple Street is where the precinct is, they now need to figure out how to adjust the precinct boundaries so that it both goes down both Maple and Elm. If the school district draws a line on Maple and the city draws a line on First, then they're going to have to incorporate precincts that take all those into account. The precincts have gotten really ugly in California because of all the districting.
And then one last thing, how have you found participation to be? Is it kind of a linear? Is it drop off? Does it go up after people get to know how it works, or?
It's binary almost. There's the pre-map and the post-map. So oftentimes pre-map, you'll get some people who are maybe more activists that come up and talk. Maybe they want to talk about whether they like the idea of going to districts or not. Maybe they want to talk about the number of council seats or not. Maybe they'll talk about communities of interest a little bit, but it's very abstract, the discussion about districts, until they actually see a map. And it's like, wait, why is the shopping center not in my district? And why is this district line going down this street and not that street? And why is my neighbor who lives across the street in another council district? This makes no sense. So the conversation changes after you have draft maps. We've seen redistrictings where there was a ton of engagement early, and then a map came out, and most people were like, okay, that makes sense. And then engagement fell off. And we've seen others where there was no engagement early until a map came out, and maybe one community group got really organized, and there's 25 people here to testify. So it just depends. Seen everything.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's go to, I'd like to open up the public comment on the public hearing. And so at this time, if you have any questions or anything, this is the perfect time to ask because we got a great person to answer some questions. Marilyn, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Marilyn Joyce, Healdsburg. I have some probably dumb questions, but maybe other people have them too. So if all the candidates, or say three candidates end up in the same district, how does that work? And say there's 5 districts and the other 4 don't get to vote, how is that democratic? and how does it increase engagement? And then I'm wondering, and I'm sure that this is all going to be better defined, but this is where I am right now. Does the districting end up labeling people and therefore creating more identity segregation? So someone mentioned size of lots. Well, that's a kind of segregation because larger lots usually indicate a higher income. So my third question I didn't define very well for myself. I guess it's, what if a district consistently doesn't have a candidate, and so they have no reason to vote? So year after year, because they don't have someone who's able to step up and run for council, they're no longer part of the democratic process of choosing the council. Anyway, those are kind of where my head's going. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll answer all the questions after public comment. Anyone else? Welcome.
Hi, Whitney Hopkins, Healdsburg. I just thought I would comment that I was surprised in the presentation of the options that I felt that option one was being encouraged in the statement that it best responds to the goal of the districting process, when I think that all of these options are legally valid options, and I hope that we would be open-minded to consider all of them. Just thinking off the top of my head about the voting process, I feel like it would be easier to start to feel more disenfranchised as a voter if you're only getting to vote for one candidate out of 5. So I think we need to be open to the various options, including option 2 of having an elected mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Welcome.
Good evening, everybody. Jonathan Perlman, Matheson Street. I thought Marilyn brought up 2 really good points. One was about creating an artificial segregation. You see that in places like San Francisco, where you have the Pacific Heights district and the Bernal Heights district, very, very different, income and concerns for the city. So therefore, I think the idea of having an at-large mayor makes some sense, that there's one person who's really looking at the city. Now, for Healdsburg, that's probably not as big a concern, because I know all 5 of you are concerned about the entire city. But I think that the issue of influence from a mayor is a good one. The other thing was something I'm forgetting. Yeah, the question of what happens if someone doesn't, from a district, there's nobody running from that district. What then happens if there's no one represented? Because basically the disenfranchisement is that if I'm in district that doesn't have a council member that's up for election that year, so I'm not voting for anybody that particular year because my district isn't up. But what happens to the city if no one runs for a particular district? Thanks.
Thank you. Mayor, welcome. Oh, welcome to Healdsburg.
Thank you, Rosa Reynosa, Mayor of Windsor. But I just wanted to share my thoughts because, as you all know, we've been through this recently. And so I'm just here to say, if you guys have any questions or want to come to us to see how we did things. I was a resident when we were going through this, and I was not very impressed. I was very impressed with your the person you hired, yeah, very, really great presentation. But also just to please encourage you all to really take it slow and to make decisions after you've heard from everybody and to not take into consideration right now where you're living. That was one of the biggest disappointments that I saw in my community when they first went into districts. And so, again, just to be here to support, reach out to us if you guys need any help. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, welcome.
Hi, Richard Berg, Fitch Street. I just have some questions for the consultant, since he said you're only looking at people when you begin to draw districts. And yet there's data available about voters also. And the difference between people and voters in a community that has 30% plus Latinos might be a really interesting piece of data to think about when you're drawing districts. The goal is to create opportunities that are equal in every district, but we don't really know where unless we look where the voters come from. And of course, the precinct data would tell us about that. I'm not sure what voting as a block really means, which is one of the reasons the CVRA was written. So I'm curious about that. There was one data point that I'd love to have explained, which may have to do with the rebalancing based upon California's law that redistributes incarcerated people to where they're from. It was curious to me, looking at that data from the 2020 census, the population of Asians in Healdsburg was 164. But when you look at the same number for the CVAP, it was 187. And I'm curious if the difference of 23 Asians in Healdsburg comes from the redistribution of the incarcerated, because it seems otherwise unclear how that delta occurred. Looking forward to the rest of this process.
Thank you. Anyone else? Bill, welcome.
Phil Lux, Healdsburg. The only reason we're here and we're engaged in this process is because a lawyer wrote us a letter saying that the Latino population in our town is underrepresented on the city council. I think there are lots of parts of this process that are going to be distasteful and unpleasant, but I think the process will be a failure unless you create at least one district that gives the Latino community a better chance to elect a representative than they now have. I think one of the questions, in addition to the whether we have a elected mayor or keep with 5, and I would keep with 5, is whether we want to or even can have more than one district that is that is basically either a majority or lots of people who are currently underrepresented on the city council. I actually think that we can come close to having a contiguous, compact, whatever the buzzwords are, district that basically includes the Exchange Avenue area, the Randall, and then just switches over to the other side of Healdsburg Avenue and runs all the way up to Healdsburg, all the way up to the end of Grove Street. And I think if you look at that district, you'll see virtually all of the affordable housing. You'll see the 2 big apartment complexes that are market rated complexes that are at the end of Grand Street and at the end of Grove Street. There's lots of issues associated with stigmatizing people, but the state law says for these purposes, we're going to stigmatize people. So I hope as you do your deliberations you just grow tough skin and realize that that's just part of the process that we're embarked upon. The alternative is to have a losing lawsuit. So please be rigorous in trying to accomplish the only reason we're here for, which is to try to get greater representation from a currently represented segment of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mark, welcome.
Good evening. I'm Mark McMullen from Parkland Farms. I look forward to drawing all the districts, to seeing all the discussions that we have about that. But what I'm here to advocate for tonight is not to go with the 4 districts and 1 at-large mayor, but I would advocate for 6 districts and 1 at-large mayor. I think that increasing representation upon the council and bringing more people onto it will be very beneficial for Healdsburg in the future. This is a point in time where we are going to change the way that Healdsburg is governed and the way that it is going to be, the future is going to happen in Healdsburg. And I think that having 6 districts with, currently about 1,900 residents is better than the 4 districts that with an at-large mayor of about 2,800 residents. So I really want you to think about the 6 districts with the at-large mayor as a really good thing for the future of Healdsburg. We're going to grow. By 2040, we'll probably have 14,000 people in this town. And I think that having more representation is important. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Betsy Malice and I live in Windsor, and I went through this process several years ago. I probably sat through about 30 hours of meetings with the town, different workshops, different meetings. And I encourage you to get as much public input as you can. We all sort of agreed we didn't want to be there. We didn't want to do it. We spent a lot of time saying, can we fight it? You guys are at least at the advantage knowing that nobody's fought it successfully and you don't have to spend any additional money trying to fight it. You just sort of have to do it. But there are a lot of positives to doing it and things that we didn't necessarily see when we started. So I encourage you to look at all of the maps, whether they be 4 districts and an elected mayor, whether they be 5 districts, whether they be 6 districts and an elected mayor. I think there's a lot of possibilities, and I think that we've been thinking in a box for so long that we don't look at everything that's out there. When they talked about communities of interest, it could be a subdivision, it could be a school, it could be the people that use the dog park, it could be the people that use the running track or the tennis courts. There's lots of the communities of interest that overlap. And so I really encourage you to get as many people involved and to not lock yourself into one set of districting before the maps come out for people to see, because it's hard for people to conceptualize until they see it. Once they see it, in writing and they can get in touch and feel it, their opinions sort of change about it. One of the big discussions in Windsor was one of the reasons we went with an at-large elected mayor was that would then give every citizen the opportunity to vote for an elected official once every 2 years, as opposed to only being able to vote for an elected official one time every 4 years. And that was decided that was important to the citizens of Windsor. So I just encourage you to go through the process and to get as many people involved in as many ways and to be open to the information that you find and, make a positive out of what is being required. So that being said, the actual law and what it was trying to correct or encouraged, I'm not sure whether it really did or not, but there's an opportunity to really grow and make this a positive change for your community. So I hope so, and thank you so much for listening to me. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, with that, we will close the public hearing. And Paul, do you want to answer some of the questions? We had, what happens if there are 4 in one district
Yeah,
for elected
I can
officials?
answer any of those questions. Generally, I don't respond directly to public comments, so you guys just relay to me the ones you want raised. And I can start with that one.
Yes.
So first off, we'll draw the districts without concerning ourselves where incumbents live. And if 2 incumbents are drawn into the same seat and it's say 2 candidates that Edwards and Hagel that just came up this election, right? And you're drawn in the same seat, then in 2028, you would be either running against each other or one of you decide not to run or whatever, but that's just the way it would work. Now, if Edwards and Mitchell ended up being drawn in the same district, everybody loves a Mitchell, but you're gonna potentially have to decide how you number the district, whether that's gonna align to 2026 when Mitchell will be up, or align to 2028 when Edwards is up. And if you were to draw it aligned to 2026, Councilwoman Mitchell could run for reelection. Edwards could stay on the council, but when he did term out in 2028, there wouldn't be a seat for him to run for. Or Edwards could run again in 2026 in the new district, and then when he won, vacate his at-large seat, and you'd be able to appoint an at-large council member. A kind of correlated question that came up was, what if nobody runs for a district? So if a district is created and nobody runs, I'll defer to your city manager, legal counsel, but generally you have an appointment process that you would do for any seat that's that somebody does. And those questions about the nesting of council members in districts or the order of districts and all that kind of stuff is things that we'll address at the end of the process. When we actually start dealing with the numbering. And the last comment I'll make is that I've seen city councils have to deal with these issues a lot. City of San Mateo had a situation just like that. When are we going to make this election come up? We have 2 council members in it that are in different election years. And the city manager literally had to go out to his car and get a coin, came back and flipped a coin, and that was the decision. They just went with a coin flip. So it can be handled amicably. It's something that we'll deal with at the end. Do you want to run some other questions at me?
Yeah,
Let's do the
district
data one.
identity. There's a question about district identity.
So there was a question, the question about district identity spoke to this idea of, are we creating like a segregated system when we say the lot sizes that are large are going to be in one district and lot sizes that are smaller are going to be in another district. Redistricting is one of the weird areas in policymaking where we don't do the like melting pot concept that we were raised with as kids in elementary school and civics about, you know, everything is a melting pot. The way I relate it was when I first started doing this, my daughter was, 2, and she would create little areas for all of her different food, And we do in districting want to make sure that if there's a community that has a specific concern, the tennis comment was made, and I always think of pickleball, right? And there's a big negative externality with pickleball. Ask my neighbors, because I have a pickleball court. And the people who are concerned about that might want to be in a district where they can communicate a community need to the public, to the city council. And it's not segregating them for the purposes of othering them or segregating for the purposes of weakening their political power, but it's creating districts where their concern, their community need can be better addressed by a community that's more able to engage collectively as a unit, rather than having groups with totally disparate issues be in the same district. And you could have a situation where just the part of the district that has more political power kind of overrides those other community needs. So the idea of districting is an empowering concept, even though it's different than how we talk about things generally as community and outside of the districting process.
And then what if a district does not have a candidate?
That was what was mentioned earlier. If district doesn't have a candidate, then there would not be an election and you would appoint somebody to that seat. And we've had situations where in Woodland, when they did their first districting, literally somebody said, nobody ever runs south of Main Street. And the reason nobody ever ran south of Main Street was because they weren't dumb. They nobody south of Main Street was going to get the political endorsements. Nobody was going to be able to raise money. They hadn't had the political infrastructure. And so the first time they created the districts, nobody ran south of Main Street. But they appointed somebody. And since then, they've had elections, and they've created a political structure in an area that used to not have one because of the districts.
Okay.
There was one other that I know you're about to ask me.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Which is about the Asian population being different in the citizen voting age section than in the main population section. Let's go back to what those data sets are. That first data set is the 2020 census whole population count of who was residing there on April 1st, 2020. It's a whole number. That second data set is an estimate. And I made a joke when I said it. I said, they'll say there's 5 people plus or minus 12 people. And it literally can look like that. So that data is a 5-year average of how many people were in the city that were Asian and over 18 and citizens. And it might say a number that's actually higher than the total population number. It's just a function of comparing 2 data sets with different methodologies. So it's just that one is an estimate and it's wrong, and the other is a point in time calculation. We see a lot of that.
Okay, thank you. All right, so there's a couple of things that staff is kind of looking for questions from us. But I think, one of the great things, I know when we all got this letter, it was, kind of a negative reaction that we had. But I think we need to look at the opportunity that we have. And when I'm looking forward to whatever the initial maps, I think we're all kind of looking forward to see what that looks like. I think we've all done it in our heads, but, really having a demographer really look at Healdsburg down to that detail, I think will be really interesting. And I'm looking forward to seeing the initial draft of the maps and then hearing the public comment. But I think there's a real opportunity here too, where, when you look at going to districts where you are focused on that area, and there is an opportunity of how can we encourage more people to run? Because none of these seats are permanent that we're in. That's the whole reason you have elections. But how do we cultivate, future candidates? And I think that really helps that process when you're looking, okay, these 2 districts are up. Let's really focus on that area. So I think there's a real huge opportunity. And then I'll kick things off in terms of, going forward 4 or 5 districts, elected mayor rotating. I like the system that we have now, and here's why. I like the fact that, when we look at going to districts, I feel like we're equal up here. We're not creating 2 classes of elected officials where you have one that's running citywide, and we've all run citywide. Campaigns cost more, takes more time. There's a lot more involved. The mailers, everything else it's pretty intensive. And so when I look at, all right, if we go to 5 districts and I like the fact that we get along. We don't always agree, but we get along. And I think that's a good characteristic we have here in Healdsburg. And as much as I love being mayor, I'm looking forward to rotating somewhere else on this dais and supporting my fellow council members as they enjoy the role of mayor for a year. And I really like that. So that's kind of where I'm at. So with that, do you want to?
Yeah, I agree with you on the rotation, and for a couple of reasons. Is that the experience you gain being on the council is very helpful. It's how we stay organized. I feel that we are a very functional system here in Healdsburg that has worked really well. You get to learn the issues of the whole city, even though we will be districts. So it's not so popular anymore of just moving into a position, but I feel that there's an importance of having historical preference, understanding of what has happened, where we're going with it, as opposed to a power play possibly. I'm open for it, but that's just kind of how I'm thinking on that, is that the 5 with the rotating is a very good collegial system that allows growth.
Thank you. Councilmember Harden.
Thanks. I agree. I would just add that I think one of the real silver linings here, you kind of mentioned it, but the silver linings with district elections is that in Healdsburg's case, that means an election is less expensive and easier to run, and that really removes a huge barrier to involvement for a lot of people. And contrarily, if you have a mayor running citywide, it does give an advantage to someone who's more financially and politically connected than somebody who's you know, a group of people, you know, over a period of years who's willing to tackle a smaller electorate to join the city council. Just to consider, I guess, the idea of smaller districts, I really think, you know, I prefer more districts rather. I think is definitely going to be a very difficult impediment to involvement to have. And one of the biggest problems we're going to have is enough people wanting to run in these small districts in Healdsburg. But so 5 is fine. 6 I think would be really a challenge to find qualified candidates. So so status quo is where I'd like to keep it with 5 members and rotating mayor.
Councilmember Kelly.
Thank you. And I just wanted to thank the members of the public who came tonight and participated in this dialogue. I know we have a pretty big agenda of upcoming meetings to continue to discuss this. And so I'm looking forward to, I know there was a number of folks who were tuning in from the internet and Facebook, and hopefully they'll be able to participate in some of the upcoming as possible. And we really don't know the makeup of a lot of the neighborhoods in town unless we live in them or have family in them. And so really the community members, I was talking to a couple folks who were born and raised in Healdsburg who happen to be realtors this weekend at the Rotary Crab Feed. And we were talking about just the nature of each individual neighborhood. And when they're selling homes or talking to homeowners, it's really, whether it's the Bird Courts or Rivers Bend Senior Community or up on the side, you know, hillside of Fitch Mountain on Sunset, that we really have some distinct qualities to a lot of the different neighborhoods that make up Healdsburg. And we really learn that, I think, when we're out campaigning. You go to street addresses that you've never been to before, on streets that, you know, kind of up and wind around, and there's a street that goes off of that street up the hill, and you really get to see a lot of different neighborhoods in this community in that way. So all that to be said, I really hope we get more participation and an active engagement from a broad cross-section of our community to make this process as robust and what we need it to do. Because as city manager said in our prior council meeting on this topic, you know, as we draw these maps, yes, we will redraw them after every census, but what we do in this time now in Healdsburg may look very similar in 50 plus years. And so we really want to get it right as we endeavor into this uncharted territory. So I welcome the participation of our community. You know, I appreciate Mayor Reynosa being here tonight and looking at what Windsor has gone through, and other Windsor residents who came to share their experiences tonight, because I think we do have a lot to learn from what our neighbors. We do have 2 other councils in Sonoma County who have 7-member councils. Petaluma and Santa Rosa both have 7 council members, and we work with a lot of them on all of the joint powers authorities that we sit on. So we have a working relationship with a lot of those folks. And I hadn't contemplated being on a council of 7, but our planning commission sits up here with 7 members. Our Parks and Rec Commission sits up here with 7 members, and they are functional as well. So I'm certainly open to the idea of having a larger council, although I hadn't truly contemplated it until we got a letter today from a resident suggesting it. You know, I know Mayor Reynosa, who just was reelected citywide in Windsor. She didn't have anyone run against her, so she didn't have to mount an expensive campaign. She didn't have to kind of do all of the things that normally you would have to do if you were running at large, because, well, I don't know why residents of Windsor didn't run against her, but I think it's probably because they think she's doing a pretty good job. And so they wanted her to keep her mayor's seat. And so I think there's something to be said about, you know, that in terms of, you know, if you're running citywide, it doesn't always have to be an expensive seat. That said, I think, you know,
I think a lot of residents in our community with respect to the at-large mayor system versus the rotating mayor system versus being voted in at large, I don't think it's really a construct of the rotation. I think most people in our community don't even know that we rotate. I recall when I was mayor last year and then was running for council, people said, well, why aren't you running for mayor? And I don't know if that's ever happened to any of my colleagues, but I've definitely heard from folks that we often get that question. Why are you running for council and not running for mayor? And we have to explain that to voters and people who've lived here 10, 20, 30 years. So I think there's definitely a lot of people in the community who don't actually know what the current status quo is. So it's hard to make a decision about, do we want to maintain the status quo if it's not necessarily something. It's kind of like a GMO question. It's like, do you want to change the GMO? And people are like, well, what's the GMO? So I think with respect to the rotating mayor, it's not necessarily that it's whether the question is rotation or not. It's that the fact that most folks don't even know that the existing system, the construct of a weak mayor system, that's what it's called in language, like that the mayor doesn't have authority other than being a voting council member. They run the meeting effectively and strategically, and they sign proclamations and they cut ribbons, but otherwise, it's the same as the rest of the council. And so my concern would be if we did do a directly elected mayor seat that's at large, that people have an expectation that that person has additional powers that aren't vested within the city's charter or the lack of charter with our off-the-shelf charter. And so people may expect that the mayor has the ability to effectuate change in a meaningful way. And the reality is other than when you're in the mayor's seat, you tend to get more emails, you get more people reaching out to you, asking you to take action. But the reality is you don't have the ability to do anything unilaterally, even though a lot of folks think that you do. And so I think that would be a tricky situation for an at-large mayor who is who's mayor and it's not going to rotate, that there's an expectation that they can actually make an impact in ways that the city, their hands are tied behind their back because that's just not the way that the system is set up. So I'm open to the idea of an at-large mayor seat, mostly just because I think we haven't heard from enough residents on their opinion on the issue. But I do have concerns that if it was an at-large mayor seat, that's the expectation that they have power when in the construct they don't. And so I'm kind of somewhere in the middle on the quantity of seats. I don't want us to go below 5 seats. I think we have a lot of committee work for other agencies that we sit on. And if we had less than 5 council members, I could see that being problematic just in trying to draw enough people to participate in all of the things we assign ourselves to. And I think we would want to maintain an odd number. So I'm open to 5 or 7, but seemingly there's 3 other council members who want to stick with 5. So it's not the hill I'm going to die on either of these, but I do hope that we get more input from the community. We've had a total of 1 email prior to this meeting that was discussing the at-large mayor seat. So I don't think we've really heard from enough of a cross-section of our community as to what their desires are on this subject. But I have seen, both Petaluma and Windsor have a directly elected mayor, and I think in both of those cities it's working pretty well. And I think both of those mayors are doing a really representing their community. So I do think it would be possible here as a power grab or an expensive election if someone is, fulfilling the duties. Thanks.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Yeah, I think I made my feelings about the district elections fairly clear in our November 18th meeting. But having said all of that, not being happy about it, now that we're doing it, I think it's really extremely important to be all in on the concept. And all in on the concept for me says 5 seats and rotating mayor. I think Councilmember Kelly says that people don't really understand how that works. And at the same time, maybe we should ask for their opinion on whether we should have an at-large election mayor. I think it could lead to a lot of confusion if we did that, where people would, that position just by being elected in that way would be, while only still have 1 vote, I think there could be a lot more influence in that way. And I think that we want to keep everybody even, and we want to have all the districts even, and every district council member would have an opportunity to be the mayor. And I think that's an important part of this whole process. And, it's the leadership that we do together for our entire community. We're not going to sit here and only worry about our one little district. So I do feel that this would create a better sense of shared leadership, I think, as our city manager may have put it. And so that would be my vote.
Thank you. All right, so there's some direction on that. Looks like we've got 4 council members that want to go to, so we'll proceed with 5 districts. I think one thing we need to really take into account or take into consideration is going back to the opportunity piece. I think when we look at individual districts, there's always a concern of like you were saying, I'm only focused on my district. I don't anticipate that really happening in Healdsburg. But I think there's also a huge opportunity when we're looking at community conversations, which we've talked about bringing back, which we did before COVID. Once these districts are set, I'm envisioning the community conversations where we're all going to the different districts and, all right, for this district, we're going to have a community conversation where before we kind of tied it to, let's do one in Parkland Farms, let's do one over by Summers Market, and, kind of rotate it around a little bit. But now it's going to be district focused where we're all there listening to what the concerns are for those districts. I think when you're talking about districts, this came up before, that if, say that we all were part of most of us were part of the discussion on the L&M Village, and I think that came up where, okay, if that was going to be in, say, your district or my district, and, the residents in my district are up in arms about it, but I feel like, there could be some issues there, which is kind of frustrating with the district concept. However, we have shown time again that we kind of look at city of Healdsburg citywide and what's best for the community. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity that with this entire process that we're going to experience going forward. So I'm looking forward to this. Like I said, we're just at the very beginning of the public input phase on the various maps and the districts. And so I think when we see the maps, it's going to be, I feel like for us, that's where it's really going to trigger of, drawing the lines and some community input. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to. So any other questions or comments on this item? Yes.
City Manager Kay, for residents who didn't know we would be making this kind of threshold decision tonight, is this kind of the final decision on the number of districts and the at-large mayor, or is that still something that people can weigh in on, or we are?
Honestly, that's really up to the council. As we said, and what I'll stand, there is no statutory regulatory deadline on either of those decisions. What I said before, and I think you all appreciate, is that at some point it would be problematic to begin the mapping process without some resolution on that. So our recommendation was and remains no later than the second public hearing, but as soon as possible. And I understand that's unfortunately, a little vague, but that's our recommendation. There's not a deadline out there. So if the council's comfortable, and it appears that it is, then we'll take that as our marching orders. If the council majority would prefer to take more time and have another conversation come back, that's okay too. I would ask if there's any additional information you need from staff if that were the case.
Councilmember Edwards?
I'm happy that people stayed after the resolutions to see some turnout, because I have been talking to as many people as I possibly can to be involved in this process. It starts tonight. I mean, there was some misinformation that, tonight is just a repeat of November 18th. And I was saying, no, each meeting is important. It's government-wise, it's a short process on how long it takes us to get stuff done. And I think I've received one letter about the at-large, and I'm listening to the comments tonight. I haven't heard a lot that's different than what the council had said. So I'm open to hear what other people say, but I'm comfortable with as much output as we have done, which I think we learned a lot after the election of how hard it is for us to personally reach out. I know that each of us have all been reaching out to people to be involved. The turnout tonight is good, and going with what we've heard tonight, I think that I can support the 5.
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that I don't think folks knew we were making this decision tonight. And also I heard from a number of people who came to this room to say they want an at-large directly elected mayor. So that's why I'm considering it. And I think I will be lodging my vote to support the at-large directly elected mayor and 4 council members, districts.
Okay, Councilmember Harridan. Well, I just want to counter that by saying, this process is it's a lot of change, a lot of decision, a lot of work in a pretty short period of time, and I'm hearing from staff pretty clearly that the whole process would benefit from us making a decision on the composition of the council sooner than later, and so. I'm leaning towards, giving firm direction tonight. And I don't think it's controversial to keep things the way they are, Ben. I don't think that we've had, people have never really, maybe they felt that we were stuck in this system or not, but I don't think anybody's really felt, that it's been an impediment to our democracy in Healdsburg to have it be this way. So, I mean, it's working. And so I don't think it's controversial to keep it this way. And we could change in the future if we had to. I know the time is now, but I think the whole process, which, is so difficultly crunched, it would benefit from us making a decision tonight.
I concur.
All right. So I think there's the direction. And so with that, any other questions from staff that you need from us for direction? All right, so we'll move forward with 5 districts and look forward to the next steps. So if it's okay, do you mind if we take a 5-minute break? All right, so we'll recess until, let's see, how about 8:45? All right. Jake, I'll do this again. Bring us back into session. Next item up is a canvass of the 2024 municipal election results and installation of council members. And I'll turn that over to,
Me.
yep.
Good evening, council. Tonight, the recommended action is to declare the results of the general municipal election held on November 5th and install newly elected council members. Next slide, please. On June 17th, by resolution, the City Council scheduled the general municipal election for the purpose of electing 3 council members. Also on June 17th, the council by resolution placed Measure O, the City of Healdsburg housing measure, on the November 5th ballot. Next slide, please. Based on the election results, Ariel Kelly, Ron Edwards, and David Hagley were elected to the office of City Council for 4-year terms. Next slide, please. And Measure O, the Healdsburg housing measure, was defeated. Next slide, please. Again, the recommended action is to adopt a resolution declaring the results of the general municipal election held on November 5th and install new council members. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, any questions for Raina? All right, all right, we'll open up to public comment. Any members of the public? All right, seeing no one, we'll bring it back to, I guess, take an action first. So I'd entertain a motion.
To adopt a resolution declaring the results of the general municipal election held on November 5th, 2024, and such other matters as provided by law, and install David Hagley, Ron Edwards, and Ariel Kelly as city council members.
I second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yeah.
Councilmember Harrod?
Yes.
Councilmember Kelly?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mitchell?
Yes.
Mayor Hagley?
Yes. All right, so we get sworn in right now, right?
Yes, so now you guys can come down from the dais and I will swear you in.
So 4 years ago, we were on Zoom.
Oh, that's right.
Stand right here front. Okay, we are going to do your oath of office individually. Hagley, your
Yeah, I do. Come on. Yeah, stand by.
I,
David Hagley,
do solemnly affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I'm about to.
About which I'm
Do solemnly affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear
that I will bear
true faith and allegiance
true faith and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California.
that I take this obligation freely
I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion,
and that I will
and that I will
well and faithfully
well and faithfully
discharge the duties
discharge the duties
upon which I'm about to enter.
on which I'm about to.
Solemnly affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter. One more. My first official non-COVID variant. One,
All right. Ah.
Can I
right.
just say congratulations to all of our newly sworn in council? It's really exciting to have this same group for another, at least for me, 2 years. Congratulations to everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm pleased too. Congratulations. You all worked really hard for this and deserve it very much. And I look forward to working with you for the next 2 years.
Yeah, and I also want to acknowledge the others that ran. Linda's here, and then Heather was here earlier takes a lot to run for office. And so anybody that runs, it's a lot to put yourself out there. So I appreciate anybody that goes through the process of filing the paperwork, doing all the events, knocking on doors and everything. It's really a big deal. So I appreciate anybody that's stepped up to run for public office. All right, next up, we are on item new business 9B, appoint a council subcommittee to interview Parks and Rec Commission and Senior Citizen Advisory Commission applicants. And we are going to be forming two subcommittees, one for senior citizen and one for parks, correct?
That is correct.
All right, I'll turn it over to you, unless I covered it.
You did a pretty good job. So as Mayor Hagley said, the recommended action is to appoint two subcommittees this evening. Next slide, please. So the deadline to apply for both Parks and Rec and the Senior Citizen Advisory Commission. The applicants will be interviewed the following week from January 13th through the 17th. And then the council subcommittees would make recommendations to the full council at the January. Next slide, please. And again, your action is to appoint two council subcommittees, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions? All right, any members of the public that I'd like to open up public comment on this item? Members of the public? All right, I will close public comment and bring it back for discussion, and I will pull myself out from being on a subcommittee. So, yes, go ahead.
Unfortunately, the week that's being suggested as interviews, I'm unable to participate as I'm having.
And I also have crazy work month in January. I'm traveling twice and I can't make it either, so.
Looks like I'm back in the mix.
Yeah, you're back in the days.
All
Sorry.
right, so are you gone for both of them, or could you?
To me, I thought that all the interviews would be the week of January 13th through the 17th per the staff report. So if that's the case, then I am equally as gone that same week.
Okay.
Same.
We can absolutely change the appointment date to a meeting in February to accommodate interviews for a different week.
Okay, well, let's keep going here. What are your suggestions?
I'd like to be on the senior council subcommittee.
I would support that.
I hadn't really planned on offering up my name for either one of these, but if we need me to, I'm happy to. I am the liaison to the Parks and Rec, or at least I am now. Maybe I won't be in a minute. But I'd be happy to serve on the committee with Ron for the senior advisory.
Okay, all right, so then I'm fine with that. All right, so on the, so you guys are both out for that? If we don't-
change the date to do it later, I don't know what the vacancies look like and if it's problematic for the commission to not have us act when on the time schedule that's being suggested by Raina.
So I think they serve until a replacement is picked,
Yes,
right?
the current commissioners would serve until a replacement is appointed. The only exception to that is there would be one vacancy on the Parks and Rec Commission, as we have a resignation because she was appointed to the Arts and Culture Commission. But other than that,
So I think what we'd recommend, we can be flexible on the dates for sure. So I would just recommend.
Okay, I'm happy to serve on the Parks and Rec subcommittee and we can figure out the timing.
I'm also, so yeah, we can, I guess February, if that doesn't hurt the process too much. I'd be happy to be a part of that.
Okay, so I think we kind of have our subcommittees set. Do we need to make a motion on that one or no? Adopt a, no, so we just appointed. The one thing I'll say on the Parks and Rec Commission, so I spoke to, we have a youth commissioner, and we came across this when we were doing the Arts and Culture Commission. And I feel like we really have an opportunity to kind of focus in on that. And so I spoke to Dana Grandi, who runs the Warm Springs 4-H. She has like, within that, they have like a government group of kids that are active. And she's offered, if staff reaches out to her with the application process and what's involved, she's happy to get that into the hands of the various leadership groups, whether it's FFA or I think even at the high school, there's some other groups that are kind of leadership oriented. So we can kind of help nudge along with more of a targeted approach to encourage the youth involvement, because these are kids that, just off the top of my head, there's a couple names that pop up after I think, Chief and I both went and met with the Warm Springs 4-H. I can't remember the name of the group. It's like a government group. And the questions they asked were very, very good. It was, it was a very good meeting that we were in. So if, I'll get the contact information, but I just want to make sure that at least there's an opportunity for them to look at it. And then maybe if there's a couple of kids that are interested, maybe somebody from community services or, one of you can go meet with the group to kind of tell them what's involved, because both of you have served on Parks and Rec, to make sure that they understand what the commitment is, what's involved and what you're studying. So just wanted to add that part. So.
Thank you. Great. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Next up, city council meetings and work session dates for 2025. These are all you, Raina.
They are, yes. I don't have a presentation for this one. It's just a slide with the meeting dates for 2025. I did want to note there are 5 options for strategic plan and goal setting meeting. As noted in the staff report, we are asking you guys to select 2 as the council strategic plan is up for renewal. And we would like to do goal setting one day and strategic planning on the next. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so I think I'm pretty much okay with this, but I think Councilmember Harrod, you needed to check some of your schedule. Is that correct?
Well, I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if everybody could bring out their phones and let's just yeah, go ahead.
For the strategic planning date on March 10th and March 17th, I think that's what I'm reading here. Or I guess that's the regular meeting calendar. And then on the right are the strategic planning dates. Are those proposed to be during the day, at night, like at the time of our council meeting, or what were you thinking?
Similar to last year, it was an all-day kind of 8 to 4, 9 to 3 event during the day.
So we have Monday, March 10th, Friday, March 11th. Oh, sorry, 21st. Friday, April 4th, Monday, April 14th, and Friday, April 18th. So we just need to settle on one, correct? Or are we doing 2 of these? Okay. So March 10th.
We need 2, is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
1 for strategic planning.
Yes.
So I have 2 dates that don't work for me, and that's the March 21st and April 14th.
All right, so March. I think all the others work for me. So the April 14th and March 21st, those are the ones that are out for you, right?
Are you asking Councilmember Harrod?
Yes.
March 21st and April 14th.
Okay. Councilmember Kelly, are you good with the other ones?
I'm available all of those dates, but I do want to mention that Monday, March 10th is the SCTA RCPA meeting. And I think we're talking funding formula on one of those 2 dates. So it's a little bit tricky to not be there.
That is also my least favorite day.
April 14th.
Oh.
All right, so that brings us down to April 4th and 18th, correct?
Yeah.
All right, this side of the dais sounds like all of the dates work. All right, so let me just double check. So the 4th and the 18th, Friday the 4th, both of those are good for me.
Me too.
All right, 4th and the 18th of April.
Wonderful.
Okay. All right, so we're set on, well,
Public comment?
yeah, need to open it to public comment. Linda, all right. We'll close public comment, bring it back. Next one, appointment of council members to various boards and commissions for 2025. So,
That's also me.
yep.
Okay, next slide, please. So the action this evening is to assign council member appointments to various boards and commissions for 2025, as well as adopting a resolution appointing a commissioner and alternates to the Northern California Power Agency, the Transmissions Agency of Northern California, and the Lodi Energy Center's Project Participant Committee, and rescinding all previous appointments. Next slide. The City of Healdsburg is an active member of NCPA, as well as TANK and the Lodi Energy Center project. They were established through JPAs to primarily procure power. As members of these agencies, the City of Healdsburg is entitled to have The appointments require formal action by the City Council. Staff recommends, in addition to the appointed council members, the city manager and the utility director also be appointed as alternates to the NCPA Lodi Energy Center commissions, and that the NCPA general manager be appointed as an alternate to the Tank Commission. The proposed resolution provides for these proposed primary and alternate appointments and also rescinds existing appointments and resolutions. Next slide, please. The Arts and Culture Commission was recently established a few months ago. Staff is recommending adding a council liaison to the Arts and Culture Commission. Next slide. So this begins the the list of appointments to the boards and commissions. Before you guys jump in, I did want to note that there are a few positions that are normally held by the mayor and vice mayor. Those positions are the mayor's and council members city selection committee, the Healdsburg High School Scholarship Committee, and the Marie Sparks Award. These appointments will be filled in with the name of the mayor and vice mayor once those positions are selected later this evening. Next slide, please. And I'm happy to answer any questions. We can go through these slide by slide as you guys decide who you want to appoint.
Okay. I mean, because we don't really have people shifting around except for the mayor, vice mayor position, is there anything that anybody doesn't want to be on anymore? 'Cause, I mean, I like being on NCPA and, but going through this list, are there any changes?
No, for me, I'm happy to continue to serve.
Similar.
Same.
So the one that I did want to ask about was I would have an interest in serving as a representative for the chamber. But I want to check with you first. That's one that I really want to do some engagement with the chamber districts and the kind of expanding, you know, what they're doing and kind of work on the relationship with the city and, you know, just kind of work with the chamber as they're, you know, they have a new incoming board.
I'm really happy there. I feel like my contributions have been meaningful, and so I'm hesitant to pass that along to you, frankly, but open to discuss it.
Yeah, you want to be the alternate on that?
I already am the alternate on
I
that.
mean, do you want to keep that?
I would like to keep that, but, and
Okay.
Chris has been doing a really good job on that committee, I think.
Okay. All right, so other than that, let's see. So, Arts and Culture Commission, who wants to be the liaison to that? Councilmember Kelly, anybody else? All right, you're it.
Do we know if the Arts and Culture Commission has established a meeting day or time? I should probably ask that before I volunteer.
The meeting day and time is the fourth Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m. here in the council chamber.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Do we need to check in with Sean McCaffrey on that appointment?
He's still there.
He's still there? I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I just wondered how that was handled, but
Yeah, he's on a 4-year term that doesn't expire until 2026.
okay, I missed that. Thanks.
Yes.
I wanted to ask about the Healdsburg Tourism Improvement District seat that Vice Mayor Mitchell. That would be a seat you would be interested in transitioning out of to see if there's an opportunity for someone else to participate there, because I'd be interested in it.
I really would like to stay on that. It's a really important committee to me. I realize there's been some changes, but I've been, making a lot of headway with that as well. So I really don't want to give that up. At least not yet.
Okay, I would just urge that I think that we're seeing the HTID continue to do more funding for things that are not the things that they've traditionally funded. Like we've seen a lot of their funding go down for 4th of July and other like community oriented celebrations. And I think that those organizations are kind of scratching their heads wondering like why they're not getting as much funding. To have you share, like report out or make it a more, I know the meetings are public, but I don't know when they are. I don't think anybody knows they are, but maybe you could report out or just share kind of when those things are happening to give it more transparency to the council so that we know what's going on there.
Absolutely. The meetings are public and I could certainly let people know when they are, but they are posted as well. So
I think there's a possibility to have 2 council members as part of that as well. If you could explore that, I'm not sure, but that would be worth looking into.
So it's third Tuesday of the month at the chamber offices at 2 p.m. is what it says for HTID.
it's when the grants, they have them 3 times a year. There's been discussions about changing that as well, but the committee meets with the grant season, if you will, and reviews the grant applications, discusses them, and makes recommendations to the HTID board. The grant committee doesn't make the final decisions, only the recommendations. So
Does it seem like members of the public come to the meetings or?
we've had a couple, yeah, not a lot, but surprisingly, because there is what you're saying, the concern that there's been a change in the approach, but people aren't really showing up. So we need to make a better effort to get them there at the meeting to hear. But I mean, there's some restrictions about what the money's used for at this point. It has changed since the HDID and the chamber combined. So it is different. The reality is it's different. And so I fight pretty hard for the community events, the 4th of July, the Duck Dash, the Turkey Trot. But ultimately it's up to the HTID board, what they decide to do. So we'll keep working on it.
All right. Okay, so I think at this point, that was it that we had to, the Arts and Culture Commission was the new one that we needed to add. Okay, so you'll circulate an updated one for the next meeting that we
Yes.
approve? Okay, perfect. And that'll be on consent? Or is it done now?
The resolution for NC,
And for the list of all the positions.
it's done now, so you
Okay.
guys will do it by.
All right, I would entertain a motion.
I move to adopt the council member appointments for the various boards and commissions for 2025 as discussed.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Harrod?
Yes.
Councilmember Kelly?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mitchell?
Yes.
Mayor Hagley?
Yes. And we have one more.
I move we adopt a resolution appointing a commissioner and alternates to the Northern California Power Agency the Transmission Agency of Northern California and the Lodi Energy Center Committee, and rescinding all previous appointments. But we didn't mention names, did we, yet? Or is it the current
It's-
group?
yeah,
If it's the same, it's
Yeah, myself and
Okay.
Chris.
as alternate.
Mayor Hagley and Chris Harrod as alternate.
And then we're also adding utility director and city manager as alternates as well.
Second?
Right.
We already did that. Sorry.
That was a motion.
A motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Harrod?
Yes.
Councilmember Kelly?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mitchell?
Yes.
Mayor Higley?
Yes. All right. Now we move on to selection of mayor and vice mayor for 2025.
And before you do that, if I could interrupt you, you know what's coming next,
I
right?
forgot. Yeah.
So I just want to say that I've really enjoyed working with you as vice mayor, and thank you for what you've done as mayor. You have gone to all the events. You are always so smiling and happy. Your DJing is known by the town. I think your jackets are, your sparkly jackets are legendary at this point. So I just think your sense of fun and inclusion is so inspiring. And I just want to thank you for all you've done as mayor. And I have the privilege of giving you this gavel.
Nice. Well, thank you.
And if anybody else wants to speak, please do.
Yeah, you bring a lot. Your love of Healdsburg comes through, and I know you enjoy sharing that, and that you're just an amazing cheerleader for all the good things we're doing in town. I think the town and this council appreciates you for those qualities.
Thank you.
Yeah, you've been a very collaborative mayor. It's been great serving under you, and look forward to being having you on the council and more of your sequin jackets.
You got a lot of pizzazz in your jacket collection. That is second to none. And I concur with all of the remarks of our colleagues. You have done a great job leading our council this year and working us through some tricky meetings at times and contentious issues, and have done it with, a very polished sense of class, and also keeping us on task and moving it forward at when we've needed to as well. So thank you. And truly your love of Healdsburg and love of this community is so evident in everything that you do and how you do this role. So thank you for your service, and 4 more years.
Well, thank you. I honestly had forgotten about this part, even though we do it every year. Thank you. It's been fun being mayor this year. No major catastrophes or a few more weeks left. Stop. But it's an honor to be able to serve the community. I don't take it for granted that, I get to sit in one of these seats up here. Like I've said before, I approach this like our community members that volunteer at Kiwanis or, Rotary or anything else that people volunteer in our community. And the fun thing is there's so much that we get to see that's going to be happening that is so exciting about stuff that we've been working on that, and being on council this long, I actually get to see some of the things happen. So some of the things I voted on were going to be there for ribbon cuttings. And so there's a lot of exciting things that I think just, the privilege and the honor of just serving our community here, we get to see a lot, and it's not lost on me. And so thank you. Appreciate this. All right. Well, thank you. All right. So next one is selection of mayor and vice mayor for 2025.
I'd like to nominate Mayor Mitchell and Vice Mayor Harrod.
Oh, okay.
Second?
All right, we have a motion and a second. Did you want to do a presentation real quick? All right, I will go to public comment.
Yes.
So no presentation. Okay, all right. So before we take a vote, I'd like to open it up to the public. Any members of the public that would like to comment on this? Linda, welcome.
Hello, hi. Congratulations, all of you, on your successful campaigns. And I just would think it would be great to see Ron Edwards as mayor. You're an inspiration and you really campaign well and you're open and you like talking to people. So I don't know who I would want to see as vice mayor, but that's what, as a member of the public, I think Ron would be a great mayor.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. All right, so we'll bring it back. We have a motion and a second for Vice Mayor Mitchell to be nominated for mayor and Councilmember Harrod to be nominated as vice mayor.
He was the nomination.
Yes.
I do.
I'd be honored.
And you said yes too? Okay. All right, roll call, please.
Councilmember Edwards?
Yes.
Councilmember Harrod?
Yes.
Councilmember Kelly?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mitchell?
Yes.
Mayor Hagley?
Yes. Congratulations. I'll say I'm happy. I'm looking forward to supporting not just both of you, but the rest of the council as I shift out of this seat to do what I can to, to help in any way. I'm really glad that you get to serve as mayor that is not just on a screen in person. Because I think that's a big thing. You served as mayor last time during a resignation. We had quite a bit going on, hiring a new city manager. We went through a lot during that time. And on top of that, we had, the pandemic going on. So it'll be nice for you to be able to sit here and have conversations with us. And I'm looking forward to you in that role. And Chris, I'm excited that you're going to be vice mayor and I think you're going to be great at it. And you have served the community a long time, going back to Parks and Rec and even before your involvement. So I'm really excited for you to serve in this role and scooch over to, I guess, this seat. I don't know where we all end up shuffling around, but
Yeah, well, I'm honored. Thank you very much for your confidence in this role, and I look forward to supporting Mayor Mitchell. We've had a couple opportunities to work together on things, and we work together really well. And so, to whatever degree we have a partnership, I think it's going to be a successful one.
I agree. Thank you for saying that, though. And the comments about being mayor during COVID. Sam has a couple of good stories about that she won't tell. But yes, it was an unusual time. And I think I was supposed to be able to do one meeting here in the chamber when we had the protesters here that day. So we all went home and did it on Zoom. So bear with me. I will work hard to run good meetings as Mayor Hagley has done. And yeah, I'm excited. Thank you.
all right. Well, congratulations. Let's see. Next up is council reports on matters of interest occurring since the previous regular meeting. All right, who wants to start?
Well, we did a lot of stuff together. So, I mean, we did was really nice with the Mary Hillsburg was fantastic. That was a page out of the Hallmark movie. Then followed up directly with the senior dinner, which was really good turnout, a lot of fun this year. And then amazingly, the new fire substation. What an incredible building to see that. I mean, I feel fortunate to go from plans to actual happening in 2 years and pretty close to budget. And so that's a fantastic facility and looking forward to it being used a lot. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Councilmember Harrod?
Not too much to add to that list, you're right, we were all there together. Those are great events. I did attend the Library Advisory Board and got an update on the renovations going there. And we heard a presentation from Corazon. And the partnership between the library and Corazon is an important one. So that was a good meeting. And then also holiday fun. I got to go to the Hillsburg Chorus concert at the Raven Theater. Sold out, full house, great concert, great group, a real solid community of friends there. They're performing for the public, and so that's your thing. Definitely want to check that out next year.
Councilmember Kelly.
Yeah, so I'll just add, we attended a reception with Senator McGuire, acknowledging season and getting to thank him for his work in the state Senate. I got a lot of very concerned phone calls that I was out of town for Mary Healdsburg and the senior dinner, so apologize that I had previously scheduled a trip. It's going to be on that same weekend. But it is, thank you guys for holding down the fort and conducting an amazing celebratory weekend for our community. We had our SCTA, our CPA meeting last week, and we are, there's looking at renaming the agency. So on paper, it'll still be SCTA, but you may hear of a new naming convention coming up soon for that joint agency. I don't know if it's not a secret, but I don't know if it's public yet. And I think it might still be TBD. So stay tuned. And one of the things that there's a few things that were on the agenda there, and I'll send out the slide deck just so you guys are aware. We also, this past weekend, I attended the Corazon Noche de Paz, like Silent Night event. That's a toy drive, car show, and community dinner at the community center. And it was packed. There were hundreds of community members there, and it was a really beautiful celebration for folks, kids getting to pick out toys and really good food and just celebratory cookie decorating and stuff. And then I went to the Healdsburg Rotary Crab Feed on Saturday night, and they announced the grant that they gave, the largest grant in the history of our Rotary Club, to the YWCA for the community center preschool site. And they talked about the community center preschool site quite a bit, and just everyone in the room was really excited to be playing a heavy role. I think it was an $80,000 check, which is by far, probably 8 times their largest grant. And they were really excited about supporting the city's site in that way. And they're underway with the playground renovations now that is helping to fund. I think they still have a funding gap, but that's helping tremendously. And then also, let's see, I think I had one other thing to share, but it's not showing up, so I'll just leave it at that. And looking forward to the upcoming Hanukkah celebration on December 26th in the plaza. If anyone is available to attend the night after Christmas, it'll be the second night of Hanukkah. And they're also doing another candle lighting on the 31st, which is New Year's Eve, but that is over at Acorn Cafe.
And let me add, coming up on Friday night at 6 o'clock at the plaza, carol singing, very informal. There'll be some lyrics there. Show up, sing, have a good time. We had a couple off years, but we used to do this a number of years in a row, and it's really fun. So please join us.
I've done that before. It is fun. We're planning on being there. Vice Mayor?
I don't have anything to add other than I had a wonderful time at the tree lighting. It is amazing, like a Hallmark card kind of Christmas. And the senior dinner is always amazing. The food is really good. All the people that are there, you see people you don't normally talk to throughout the year who stop you and want to chat, and it's really fun. So I really like that a lot. And I thank the staff and the community services for putting that on. I don't know how they get it all done. It's amazing. So that's it.
I'll be quick. Yeah, all the events that our staff worked really hard on, Mary Healdsburg, the senior appreciation dinner, everything else, just the decorations in our town, just even this, it's, I notice all of it. We all notice it. So I just want to offer a heartfelt thank you for everything that you're doing. It goes back to, during evacuations, everything that you did to prepare the city to make it, when everybody came back, it was all cleaned up, and it's just, that has not stopped, and it's really noticed. And I know that after the senior appreciation dinner, I hope everybody at least took a couple days off and was able to, relax a little bit. But, going right into, now we got holidays and everything else, but I really appreciate everything staff has done. The fire substation, that was really exciting to be able to attend that, not just from, oh, it's a brand new building and all that, but just what it means to the north end of Healdsburg. And, red flag warnings. I mean, it wasn't even like that long ago. We've got rain now, but we had red flag warnings that were, got us all back on high alert. So it's nice to have that station ready. I did have lunch with Sheriff Ingram to kind of talk about just general issues and, how the outreach with our Latino community and things like that. And then I also attended, I think there were a couple other, you were there and Councilmember Edwards was there for the Sonoma County Tourism. They did like a breakfast. They did a presentation on just the state of the tourism industry. So that was interesting to hear that. So that's all I have. So I'm not going to use this gavel, but at 9:34, I'm going to gavel out my term as mayor now.